Okay. Katie, do we need to call the roll on this?
Yes.
Okay. Will clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Kaufman,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen, Councilmember Coombs, Councilmember Coombs,
Present. Sorry.
Councilmember Gardner, Councilmember Drinsky,
Here.
Councilmember Lawson,
Here.
Councilmember Marcano,
Present.
Councilmember Medina,
Here.
Councilmember Maria, Councilmember Sundberg,
Here.
and Councilmember Zvonek.
Here.
There's the quorum.
Very well. It's please proceed with the presentation.
All right. Greg Hayes, Budget Officer, thank you all for coming to the most fun meeting of the year. Budget workshop. We're actually going to start out with the three committee groups. We're going to start with the Citizens Advisory Budget Committee. So let me share. I'm going to be sharing all of these tonight. And online I have John O. Scott, who's our CABC chair. And I do believe, if everybody can see this, that it is ready to go. And I'll turn it over to John O. Scott.
John, I believe you're muted.
Yeah, that would help. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council. As your appointed members of the Citizens Advisory Budget Committee, we are citizens whose job is to advise on budgetary issues, and we are a committee that works together. It's been a joy. Thank you very much. Greg, can you go to the next slide, please? We do appreciate you having us. As your appointed members, I want to just give a shout out and thank you to everybody that is on the committee, and especially those that have joined on this meeting. It's been a joy to work with them, and I'm very grateful that they're a part of this committee. Very diverse group, very knowledgeable group, experienced group, and I'm thankful to be a part of this. Next slide, please. This year, we were able to get back into in-person hybrid meeting format, and which has been very helpful. We have had some on the committee that are able to participate online, and it has been helpful. But I do think it has been very enjoyable to be in person, interacting, working with each other's personalities and knowledge and experience, and that has been a joy. In the hybrid format, we're very grateful for it, but it is great to be in person as well. Next slide, please. So what we'll go over in this presentation, the goal and focus of 2022, what we were able to do and what we're doing, and then a review of the 2023 budget and recommendations. And then there were 5 subcommittees that this Citizens Advisory Budget Committee was split into, and we have 5 reports. One was a departmental review of the fire department. One was a departmental review of the 911 emergency call center, an efficiency subcommittee, retail development subcommittee, and revenue generation subcommittee. And I would refer you to the public input section, section 8 of the budget book. We'll be referring to that a lot. And really the whole point of this presentation is to refer you back to that. There's much more detail. A very beneficial substantive report is found in section H of the budget book. Next slide, please. The highlight of our year was the July 26th and 27th budget workshop. In that budget workshop, staff, specifically Greg Hayes, led the CABC through the same one-on-one packet that you all received. Very helpful and informative. Staff recommendations were highly regarded by the CABC, and the recommended approval of the city manager's budget as presented is what the CABC determined and came to a conclusion that we recommend the approval of the city's manager's budget as presented. Next slide, please. So for the subcommittee reports, 5 subcommittee reports. The first one, the departmental review of the fire department. Next slide, please. Chairing and co-chairing that subcommittee was David Rich, Janet Marlowe. On that committee was Andrews Burzens, Marcia Burzens, Sunny Bonka, Julie Marie Shepard-Macklin, and Jim Matson. Next slide, please. 4 main findings for the fire department review. Their objective was to review the performance since the last review in 2019 with Chief Gray. 4 main findings within this departmental review. The first was the benefit of the work schedule when it went from 56 hours per week to 48 hours per week, with 1 day off and 2 days on, increased morale. And I'll just mention this interview took place with both Chief Gray as well as other leaders in the fire department, as well as the rank and file members. The CABC interviewed both. Findings: 7 fire stations are in need of rebuilding or replacement due to their age. So the capital infrastructure master plan, 2 of them are already on there, but we would recommend the inclusion of the other 5. Finding: 70% of all calls are from emergency medical services. And then the 4th finding was suicide prevention and wellness programs are essential to the department and should be supported. Next slide, please. 4 main recommendations: provide a 3rd set of bunker gear and expand cleaning facilities. You'll find the details of that recommendation in section H of the budget book. Prepackaged or preloaded medication, especially for those 2 a.m. calls, would not eliminate, but severely would help quite a bit with the human error aspect. The expanding health and wellness budget, as well as training for additional paramedics, would be a help to the fire department. Next slide, please. The same group did a departmental review of the 911 emergency call center. Next slide. In that, they interviewed extensively Tina Buenetta from the 911 emergency call center, and their objective was to review the budget and procedures of this new department as of January 1st, 2021. 3 main findings were the result. They are currently underemployed. Budget for 91 full-time employees, currently has 74 full-time employees as of July, working 12-hour shifts. They feel an average of 758 emergency calls per day, and then also an average of 718 non-emergency calls per day, which is a lot. Next slide, please. 5 main recommendations after the interview with Tina Buenetta. A new facility would be beneficial to include in the capital infrastructure master plan, to include all city communication systems. Also, potentially, if that is the case, we would recommend looking into a traffic operations system that cities like Denver and Centennial have, but the city of Aurora does not. And so that would be a recommendation down the road to include in the capital improvement infrastructure master plan. One thing that was highlighted by Tina was a on-site 24-hour childcare, as well as subsidizing the wellness activities for full-time employees, both mental and physical. Explore AI platform for non-emergency calls, which would cut down on both the stress and the workload, and then increase professional development. Next slide, please. Efficiency Subcommittee, Mike Senich was the chair, Gretchen Dirks, Max Gimmelstein, and myself were on the Efficiency Subcommittee. Next slide, please. Departmental review. Our efficiencies objective was to increase efficiencies for cost savings. Findings, and really the emphasis of our report was the workforce recruitment and retention. Overtime hours are budgetary strain, and I'll go into the recommendations here in a minute. Findings: a potential review of the public defender's office. The 3rd finding was grant review process, just to make sure our grants are accessible and there's accountability. Next slide, please. 5 main recommendations came from the efficiencies report. Human resources departmental review. just a way to update and support the Human Resources Department is a need. Retaining current employees needs to be a priority. We support what was taking place. So we wrote our report in July, and we support the raises that were given in July and the flexibility and the bonuses, et cetera. And there's details given in the report. We also recommend the recruitment of new employees, competitive pay and benefits, marketing, training, and that is something that potentially could be improved and become more efficient within the Human Resources Department. It's currently 18, as of July, there's 18% vacancy rates. And we think that there is improvement to be made as far as recruiting employees. Also, a cost benefit analysis of the Public Defender's Office was one of the recommendations. And fifth, a grant process review to ensure levels of accountability and accessibility. Details are given in the report, section H. Next slide, please. The fourth report was the Retail Development Subcommittee, co-chaired by Katrina Zarelli and Jim Matson, new members of our committee as a whole, and very involved members. Very grateful to them. Katrina, Jim, then Michael Westerberg, Tish Buford, and Omar Montgomery were on this subcommittee as well. Next slide, please. Their objective was to help grow a thriving, successful small business community in Aurora. They had a proposal and several findings. To expand the Aurora Small Business Incubator Program, and then the findings was current city incubator program in the Cultural Arts District is successful. And there's four findings, other findings: grow business at low investment cost, highly accessible to small businesses, provides guidance, education, and resources, and make sure it's easily accessible. Obviously, on a budgetary mindset, it is very helpful to have revenue, and one of the best ways to ensure that and continue that and grow that is to support our small businesses. More details are given within that report. Next slide, please. Recommendations: use city-owned infrastructure. We had a very informative, helpful session with Bob Oliva, and he gave several of these recommendations that made sense to us. Purchase more business infrastructure through the sale of failed businesses. Incubator example would be Lady Justice Brewery on Colfax. Explore cooperative agreements. Possibly rent out incubator spaces at below market value to help develop small business. And the last recommendation was to allow limited use of city-owned spaces to help. Next slide, please. This is the fifth and final subcommittee report, revenue development. Danielle Lamon was the chair, Reno Corralo, Deborah Johnson, George Peck. And let me just say the chairs and co-chairs in particular are also on this call. And if you have any questions, I would refer you to them at the end. We will have a time for wrap up and questions. And I'd highly recommend you ask any questions you have, and you can direct them to the chairs of these subcommittees. Next slide, please. The revenue development objective was to recommend creating a venue in Aurora to increase sustainable revenue, fulfill a cultural arts need, increase tourism, tap into funds like the SCFD funds, and enhance quality of life for residents. Four main findings: Aurora lacks a cultural arts venue, and organizational issues exacerbate progress toward addressing that issue. Second finding: potential sites already exist that could minimize development initial expenditures. Public-private funding partnerships should be explored, and strong long-term revenue generation is possible and would benefit the city greatly. Next slide, please. Recommendations, three main ones: create a cultural arts and venues department within the city. That would be a new department. Form a special task force, and that is in play already, is already starting, but we would recommend that that continues with the assistance of an outside consulting firm to confirm our findings. Also, we recommend entering negotiations to renovate the former theater space that already exists as a storage space in the Aurora Town Center Mall. Next slide, please. You can see on the map where that already exists, and it's storage. It's empty. But we believe a centrally located, properly sized, financially viable cultural arts, events, and entertainment center for Colorado's third largest city is long overdue. And planning to overcome the shortfall, it should begin now, and there are already options available for that. Next slide, please. Thank you for listening. I would just like to say, I would refer you back to that public input section, section H of the budget book. We have just scratched the surface, the bullet points with this short presentation. There's much more details, and I would highly recommend you look at those and ask any questions that you have, especially directed towards the chairs or towards me, and either offline or right now in the time that we have available. Special thanks to Greg Hayes, Tammy Hoyle, others, his staff for once again shepherding us through this complex process. Next slide, please. So I'd like to wrap up, and we'd like to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Any questions? I'll
Mayor?
start with one. Let me start with one, and then, and that is, did you think of any revenue sources to support? How would this cultural arts venue that you just described, in your view, be funded?
Yeah, I'll refer that to Danielle.
Thank you, Mayor Kaufman, for that question. So one of the areas that we looked at was there is $3.3 million that's available in the, it is in, sorry, forgive me, I was looking for the exact area where it's at. It's in the taxes that are already collected that would be for programs for the city. So it's not the ones that has to be in specific areas as far as like that's designated for fire, police. There is one for programs. And so our recommendation is using some of those available funds. Our projections is it would be about 2.5 million to renovate the space and have it operational. And currently there's that 3.3 million. Oh, recreation impact fees. Sorry, that was the actual name. Recreation impact fees currently has $3.3 million. And then just projections, conservative projections that by getting that theater up and going, we would have 5 million plus in revenue that would come back to the city every year.
Okay, thank you. Further questions, comments?
Mayor, it's Coombs.
Councilmember Coombs.
Thank you. So in terms of the review of the public defender's office, it seemed like there was just kind of a very minimal comment on that subject. So, and the main comment was that since we're not a county, maybe we wouldn't have a need. So I do wonder if y'all look at, as we see an increase in jailable offenses, the likelihood that that will increase the need for the public defender's office, since people are entitled to a public defender if they are facing a jailable offense.
I can answer that. If you're Mike Senich is, unless he would like to take that question, I'm happy to take that. So you are right. We are not proposing to get rid of public defending. That's both compassionate, ethical, constitutional right that people have, you know, Sixth Amendment, Miranda rights, Gideon versus Wainwright. That's not what we're recommending. What we're simply recommending is that it be looked into. And I within the committee, that was probably one of the things that was talked about the most within our reports. And the very summarized report ended up being what the committee agreed on. I have more data, more information that I can give you offline. Any council member that would want it. We looked at both perspectives. I heard I met for a length of time with our public defender's office, looked into other options, and what we're not doing is saying here's what you need to do. What we're simply saying is there's other perspectives out there, and there's two trains of thoughts that are beneficial, and what we're just simply saying is look into that. There's the way City and County of Denver does it. There's the way Colorado Springs does it. There's two perspectives out there, and what we're recommending is that we look into both. Really, the point of it was crime is skyrocketing. We know that there's going to be an increase with weekend court and other mandates, and we're simply saying if we're going to increase things, we should at least look into it and study it. I like I said, we have more data, more information. I'm happy to share that with you or any other council member. We just didn't want to bog you down with details in the report.
I'm assuming that, go ahead, Councilmember.
Yeah, I would certainly love to see what you all were looking at, and also just if that includes the comparative cost analysis, if that includes the increased demand for public defense resulting from mandatory minimums, and therefore the increased threat of jail time.
Well, and I want to make it clear we're not trying to throw anybody under the bus here. You know, that's not really our goal, but we're just saying, hey, we are citizens understanding that the crime is skyrocketing. Advisory, we're simply advising, we're not creating policy. We're simply the efficiency budget subcommittee looking for bottom line dollar amounts, and we are a committee. We're just a group of people trying to make recommendations that say, hey, here are some things that can be more efficient, or another perspective could be explored.
What was one of the perspectives that was considered as contracting out? I understand that there's a large number of municipalities that essentially have contract lawyers available to serve in that capacity.
Yeah, and that's what I was just saying. There's two perspectives, and I could share that with you if you want. The perspective that many have, and I don't necessarily disagree, is hey, we're cutting edge. We're one of only 5 cities in the nation, one of only 2 in the state that have a public defender's office, you know, and it's run well. But the other perspective is, well, why is there only 5? You know, and is there a reason for that? We're not trying to make a judgment either way. We're simply saying, explore this. There's good people that differ on this.
Mayor. So yeah, so just to follow up on that, I mean, I think certainly we can look into it. I guess what I was driving at is that the likelihood is that we actually have cost savings by having folks in-house that are taking on relatively high caseload versus paying case by case, especially as we see an likely increase. So, so yeah, certainly I'd like to see data you all were looking at, and more than happy to have another discussion on that matter. So thank you for your, and for, you know, for whatever you have available to share.
Further questions or comments?
Mayor Zabonik.
Councilmember Zabonik.
Yeah, just a quick follow up on this. And it's true. I think the point Councilmember Coombs is making is that if you all have some comparison data, because I assume that, I mean, it's us in Denver that have public defenders in-house. Everybody else contracts out. So if there is some data that you all have that shows the cost per case analysis, because I think you're right, is that if there is a case be made that we could be, given that we are going to see an increase, a likelihood of increase in the need for public defenders, if it's a much lower cost to do it the contract model, we should definitely look at going that route. But I'd like to see the data to back that up. So if you guys have that available, I'd love to see it.
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
obviously, you all don't have the resources to do a study. I think that's something, Councilmember Zelon, that we should look at in these budget discussions, is allocating some money to do a third-party study as to the efficacy of doing it in-house by city employees with the legacy costs and doing it under a contract basis.
Yeah, and I would refer for our public defender's office, to their credit, they've already done one of those studies, and I would refer you to that review of the Aurora, Colorado municipal public defense system in September of 2021. So I would refer council to that, as well as work analysis, and I'm sure our city's public defender would be happy to share that with you as well. That's one of the resources that I'd be happy to share with you as well. There's just so.
Third-party study? Was that a third-party analysis?
I believe so. Yeah, National Legal Aid and Defender Association.
No, I think so. I appreciate that, but it's not a objective third-party analysis. Further comments or questions?
Mayor Kaufman.
Councilmember Jernsky? No, Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you.
I'm trying to hear your voice, so.
Thank you. So I just had a question on, and I'm glad that the committee brought up the retail development subcommittee, the idea of having the incubator program. I know that since I've been on council, I know even in the beginning, I thought that we should always have some type of co-op program or something for, startup businesses. My question to you on your recommendations, which are good, do you think that in addition, it might be warranted to have some type of task force where there could be different contributors to kind of get to some of these recommendations so we can have a more robust incubator program in different market areas, from retail to restaurants, innovation, technology? I like the recommendations, but I'm just wondering if there could be, if there was a thought process of some type of task force. I know that you have a feasibility study and there's some onus on the city to maybe partner, but I also think it's important too to reach out to the community, and especially in businesses, people who want to start businesses and maybe in different areas, to see if they want to be part of a co-op or incubator program, and how we can actually do that as a city, because I really think that this is a good idea.
Yeah, I would refer that to Katrina or Jim, if either of you would like to answer that question.
Sure can. Thanks, Jono, and thanks, Councilmember Lawson. That's so exciting to hear. This was my first project ever on the Citizens Advisory Budget Committee, so you might actually know even more than I do, since this is something you're passionate about. We did hear a lot of this from Bob Oliva, and he was telling us how the very, very small arts district, which is a little restaurant focused, is really so successful. And his idea that he relayed after so many hours of discussion was, why don't we do this with retail? Like, we're kind of doing it with restaurant, but I love the idea of a task force and expanding this to all kinds of different sectors. I think the reason it's restaurant focused right now is because that's the easiest thing that the city has had to buy the equipment for. When restaurants go out of business, the city can buy equipment for pennies on the dollar, and that's what has been done for the business like the Lady Justice Brewery, which previously was Moo Brewery, which previously I think was a different brewery, and they all are so successful that they grow out of that space. It's city-owned restaurant equipment. It's just really easy to buy. The city owns it and keeps it, and when the business gets so successful, they don't take it with them. They have to be successful enough to then get their own equipment and grow out of that space. So if we could do something like that with retail and innovation, all kinds of stuff, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, something that I think I learned from Councilmember Jurinski just from touring with her, when you have a restaurant, and you have it in a place, it's kind of hard to remove that equipment, and it has to be a restaurant, so you can't really change over to like retail or other innovation things.
Yep.
So that's kind of a thing that I have a little bit of an issue with, just the restaurant piece on just focusing on the incubator, because there's a lot of innovative people who are doing innovation in technology who just can't afford a space, but like the incubator space. And there's a lot of different advantages to that when you have those type of spaces. So I like this idea. I just wonder if there's something like a task force should be something that we should consider. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Mr. Scott, were there any considerations? Obviously, we're stressed in terms of trying to attract our workforce, as many businesses and employers are. Was there any discussion about contracting out, the city contracting out for more services than we currently do?
Yes, there was. We would recommend that as an option for sure. And then one point that was made was potentially using our human resources department has had a lot of turnover. And so what we recommend is encouraging or supporting or shoring up our human resources department, even if we have to contract that out. But one member pointed out we have 18% vacancy rate, but then things like LinkedIn, our city LinkedIn account is not updated very much. And so you look on LinkedIn and there's 0 jobs available as of July. Just things like updating those or exploring those options could either be in-house or hiring someone to do something like that.
Okay. Further questions or comments? Seeing that, I can't thank you enough for all of the effort that you put into this. We look forward to reviewing this, your recommendations, and continuing to work on them. But I can't say enough about the Citizens Advisory Budget Committee and just the dedicated effort that you all do on behalf of the city. And so I just really want to thank you. Any other comments, members of council? Any closing thoughts, Mr. Scott?
Yeah, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with the committee as a whole. If you need any information, please reach out to us. We have more. We're eager to share it. But the committee members themselves, I've thoroughly enjoyed working with them. Very knowledgeable, experienced, both on the city staff side and as the member side. So thank you to the committee, and I want to give credit to them as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The time is now 5. Let's see, it's about 5:30, 5:35. We will stand in recess until 5:40. Council stands in recess.
All right. Next up is the Citizens Advisory Committee on Housing and Community Development. I'd like to introduce Terry Marquardt, or Marquardt. I'm not sure which way of saying that, but go for it, Terry. You've got 20 minutes.
Sorry, I had trouble with the mute. Thank you so much, Honorable Mayor Kaufman and City Council members, for giving us this opportunity to present our Citizens Advisory Committee budget for you for 2023. We'll go through the slides here. Next slide. So with the decisions that we made this year, or the recommendations that we made on our budget, we always keep our community vision statement in front of us, where we're trying to make sure that Aurora continues to be a welcoming and safe community for the many diverse populations that reside here, and that we continue our reputation being known for our unique places and all of our community development, as many people contributed to what we did tonight, or what we're presenting to you tonight. And also that main focus of ours is healthy neighborhoods and smart ways to get around our communities. Next slide. This committee, and as well as many people on the City Council and throughout the rest of the Aurora community, worked about 4 years on putting this housing strategy policy framework together. And we have this up in front of us at almost all of our meetings, just so we don't lose focus on what our main 6 strategies are. And the budget that we're presenting reflects these strategies. You're probably all well aware of them. It's been handed out at several meetings, but we basically want a balanced and sustainable housing portfolio where we, in the city of Aurora, where we house a multitude of people at all different income levels. We preserve the long-term affordability of existing housing stock that we already have in Aurora. So we make sure that we don't have to start over at square one. If we keep these places, if we preserve them, keep them updated, we can preserve that stock. We also want to strengthen the city's capacity for addressing housing issues, and that comes with the development of the city staff and for soliciting ideas and from several community members and community resources. We also want to expand our inventory of housing options throughout Aurora, and we've worked hard on our budget to make sure that when we are giving money out to different housing projects or working on different housing solutions, that we're addressing not just rentals, but home ownership, homelessness, and all those various housing options throughout Aurora. We want to strengthen the local economy and expand employment opportunities. This often comes with the building of housing, but also you need to be housed to be able to usually keep a job, get a job. So it's important that we expand our housing inventory so that we can also at the same time strengthen our local economy. And we want to make sure that we support protections that are already in place for homeowners and renters as we move forward, especially in times like we've experienced in the last 2 years. Next slide. We basically get money on this budget from 3 different sources. That all comes from the feds. The first one being our CDBG, our Community Development Block Grant Program. And then also off of that program, we do get program income when either some of the projects that we've done loans on or whatever, do materialize and they're paid off, then we have program income, and we add that back into the pot for developing housing. This year, we're anticipating getting about $2.6 million from the feds again. This is the same amount that we're projecting that we were to receive this last year. And also we're kind of doing a guarded program income number of $100,000, and that gave us $2.7 million to work with. We're putting about $541,000 into community investment, affordable housing programs. We're putting money into our home repair loan program, about $350,000. We upped that a little bit this year. For minor home programs, we're also doing about $350,000. And, this, again, referring back to our housing strategies, we're trying to preserve housing that's already here and keeping people in their homes, allowing them emergency repairs as well, allowing them to apply for that. Definitely keeps good housing stock up to date and in the city. We also are trying to preserve our long-term housing with preserve our folks looking for long-term housing through our housing counseling and our different education classes. That all comes under the CDBG mantle. We also, this year, this is a new endeavor, we started a small business loan project that's new this year, and we've put money into that so that can be expanded this year. Next slide. The second pot of money that we get from the feds is our home grant. This is a larger grant. It's almost 1.25 million. And then with that, to get that funding, the city has to match out of general funds, has to do a match of $280,000. And then we also get program income back from our many programs or investments that we've done with this home money in the past. So we're estimating this year to get at least $400,000 back in program income. So that'll give us a $1.9 million to work with. And 66%, about 66% of the money that we spend in this category with home funds actually goes to brick and mortar. So we have in our community investment affordable housing program, we actually try to help developers develop their housing portfolios. We have the tenant-based rental assistance program that actually provides protection for homeowners and renters, going back to our housing strategies. And then our community housing development organization program, that's our CHODO. We use them to expand our inventory of housing options. Like I say, the majority of our money actually goes to help developers finalize projects that they bring to us asking for input of some funding. And these are all, of course, using this money, it has to be for affordable housing, which attracts people or services folks 80% area median income and below. Next slide. Our last pot of money is our Emergency Solutions Grant Program. This money, we use it, you can see how we split it out. 60% goes to shelter. We work with Comitas Shelter to make sure that their building's in good condition, that they provide the right kind of shelter for when it's needed. We also have our rapid rehousing and homeless prevention program. 32% of our money goes to that. That really helps with security deposits and first month's rent for folks exiting homelessness. And also, if some families have received a notice to vacate, eviction notice, and they owe money, they can apply for this rapid rehousing and homeless prevention funds as well. And then 7.5% of this actually goes to admin cost. This strengthens our city's capacity for addressing our housing issues, reverting back to our housing strategy, and provides many housing options for the city. Next slide. This year, well, actually starting in 2020 and going through this year and going into next year, we have about $8.5 million in one-time COVID grants. We have used a lot of this. We've done RFPs for several nonprofits to come forward and help with COVID-related items. We've bought diapers, food. We've had meetings at when we were locked down with at community centers, at large apartment complexes where food was given out, lunches were served to school-age children that couldn't go to school at the time because of lockdown. And we've also offered a lot of rental assistance for folks that got behind in rent because of COVID-related issues, like being laid off or hours cut back. So that was our one-time COVID-related grant. Next slide. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, because a large part of our money goes to our housing gap financing. And that's where we give the money to developers to help mostly at the end of their projects. Our money that we put in is usually pretty small compared to the overall cost of the project. The majority of these projects are low-income housing tax credit projects. So to make life much simpler, we have 2 rounds a year now for applications where we accept them, one in January, one in June. And this coincides with CHAFA's tax credit deadlines, so that people aren't off trying to apply at CHAFA, but they have to wait till next year to try to apply for some home or CDBG funds to finish their project. So we're trying to tie it together so that people can go in with a total project plan to CHAFA for the tax credits. This last year, we approved so far 12 projects. And that will add 972 affordable housing units to our inventory in Aurora, and we're going to keep 286 units that are already affordable housing. We've approved rehab money for them so that we can keep that affordable housing in the city. And this, going back to our housing strategy, trying to preserve our long-term affordability of existing housing with that. So that's our short presentation on our budget. It's not as big as some folks, but we'd be welcome to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions from council?
Mayor?
Councilmember Coombs.
So when you all are looking at cost effectiveness of programs, and seeing that 60% of the ESG funds go to shelter, what are other things that you could be using that on, and are there efficiencies that you might recommend council look at in terms of use of those?
Councilmember Coombs, I can answer that question. My name is Jeff Hancock. I'm with the Community Development Office. And so with our ESG grants, we don't have a lot of choice in terms of how that money is spent. HUD requires us to spend 60% of that grant on shelter and the 32.5% on the homeless prevention and rapid housing. So we're kind of, we have to follow those guidelines, and then we partner with different agencies to carry out those programs in those categories.
Okay, so we wouldn't have the option of using any of that 60% for other homeless type programs.
That's correct, yes.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Jeff. Although I do want some clarification. Maybe I read a different section of what HUD allows funding to be used for, but it was my understanding that permanent supportive housing for this would be considered shelter for this bucket that we're talking about. Is that not correct?
Councilmember Ricardo, is your question regarding whether any of that money can be used for permanent supportive housing?
I'm saying that the shelter portion, PSH would qualify under that definition if I'm not mistaken.
I would need to go back and look at that. That may be the case. One of the issues with the ESG grant is as you saw, it's a fairly small grant. We get $230,000, $250,000 a year. And so that 60% portion, $150,000 or so a year. So potentially we could put that towards that. I'd have to go back and look at the regulations to see if that was an eligible use, but that is possible.
Okay, thank you.
Please proceed. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. One left. Give me 1 second. I have here the Citizens Water Advisory Committee, and I'd like to introduce Dick Eason, and let me share my screen.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor Kaufman and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I'm Dick Eason, the Vice Chair of the Siwac, or the Citizens Water Advisory Committee, talking to you tonight on behalf of the Chair, Angie Binder, who is not available this evening. As you know, one of the purposes of the Siwac is to provide counsel and recommendations to Aurora Water on budget, among other things. Slide, please. And to that end, the committee on July 12th discussed the proposed 2023 budget to include revenue projections, operating and capital expenses, as well as the proposed 2023 water rates and fees. And then we continued that discussion at the August 9th CWAC meeting with some additional follow-up. Slide, please. A high-level view of the proposed 2023 budget based on conservative assumptions. For the water fund, about $88.3 million in operational expenses, $28.6 million in debt service, $158.7 million for capital projects. And then on the wastewater side, which includes stormwater, $65.4 million in operating expenses, $8.5 million in debt service, and $45.7 million for capital projects. Slide, please. This slide depicts the proposed rate adjustments. One of the takeaways from this slide is, per the 2022 plan, the proposed rate increase that would have been scheduled for 2023 were 3.5 for water, 4% for sewer, respectively. However, inflation and increases in capital projects resulted in an increase, resulting in a 4% proposed increase for water, 5% for sewer, and stormwater remained at 3.5 as projected. Slide, please. For the proposed residential 2023 water rates, the key takeaways on this slide is that the rates are consistent with the multi-year phase-in plan. One thing that's important is the first 5,000 gallons per month, there is no increase, and that accounts for the majority of the ratepayers' indoor use. And finally, the tiered structure promotes affordability associated with lower usage. So the more usage, the more the rates increase. Slide, please. And this slide depicts the proposed 2023 rates for multifamily, commercial, and irrigation. Multifamily, a 1% increase, and irrigation and commercial ratepayers will see a 3% increase. Slide, please. Service charges, a 4% increase across the board. This slide depicts residential, commercial, and multifamily, and also irrigation customers. Slide, please. And this slide depicts the service charge proposals for fire protection and hydrant meters. Slide, please. This is always an interesting slide. And one of the challenges in comparing where Aurora Water is in terms of rates with any other water provider is every water provider has different rate structures, different service fees, different ways they measure things. So this kind of racks and stacks Aurora Water with other water providers in the metro area, the Front Range, and it's based on 88,000 gallons per year, 4 people in the house, a 7,700 square foot lot size, and about 4,200 square feet of irrigable lawn. So you can see that Aurora Water does very well in terms of average rates compared with many of our neighboring water utilities. You see the 2 yellow bars there. The lower one is the city of Aurora in 2022, and the bar just above that shows what the impact will be with the proposed 2023 rates. The average customer will see about a 4.1% increase in their monthly bills. Slide, please. So this slide depicts connection fee adjustments. The original adjustments were based on the 2017 master plan phase-in for water and the 2018 master plan phase-in for sewer connections. There were increases from those based primarily on, the out years projections may be increased or adjusted based on master plans that will be reviewed in the next 2 years. Slide, please. The Siwac committee's recommendations. The Siwac does support the proposed 2023 water and wastewater fund budgets. The Siwac supports the proposed 2023 water, wastewater, and storm water rate increases. And the Siwac supports the 2023 water and wastewater development or connection fee increases. Slide, please. Other areas of support from the Siwac. The Siwac does support Mayor Kaufman's water conservation ordinance, and we continue to support the conservation rebate programs that are offered by the city of Aurora. And the Siwac is supportive of the Colorado River Conservation Memorandum of Understanding. And slide, please. With that, I would be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Let me start, Mayor. And so I think, first of all, I want to commend all of your work. Thank you so much for your dedicated volunteering for our city in this particular very important committee. And I just want to stress, and I think we're doing this, the importance of doing annual rate increases and not delaying for a period of time because it's administratively burdensome from doing it, and then all of a sudden having a big increase. And so I want to commend you on that. The connection fees seem pretty steep. I wonder if you could comment on that.
I see Greg and Marshall on the call. Would either of you like to address it, or would you like me to?
I can help out if you'd like. Connection fees are predominantly driven by, and I assume, Mayor, you were looking at the water connection fees that are up at the 11% range.
Right.
They're predominantly driven by water acquisition and development costs. So about 70% of the fee is associated with acquisition of water rights, development of storage like Wild Horse. So a lot of the Wild Horse costs are embedded in there. And then the distribution system expansion and any treatment expansions. So North Campus associated with the Binney Water Purification Facility is embedded in there. The other roughly 30% of those costs is associated with more of the conventional infrastructure like the distribution system, an expansion of the system into the areas of new growth. So it is to meet the demands of new growth, and it's driven by the cost of supply acquisition and development.
Okay. Further questions or comments?
Mayor Zvonek.
Councilmember Siwac.
Yeah, Marshall, this is along the same lines, Taffy. I know that during the conversations around the water conservation ordinance, we talked about the potential of having the bifurcated connection fees between consumable and non-consumable water, and having a lower rate for those new water-wise front yards for the connection fee. Is that still in the plans for this budget?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Siwac. It is still in the proposal. So while we're seeing an overall increase of connection fees in the 11% range under the new water conservation ordinance, the properties, single-family residential properties that are grandfathered or develop with high water use turf will see an increase of a couple $1,000s or that 11%. But those that develop under the new water conservation ordinance will actually see a reduction of about $1,000, 900 and some dollars in their connection fees. So the connection fees are volumetrically based. And so any connection that reduces their water use can actually see a reduction in connection fees. So the per gallon per day rate is increasing, or fee is increasing by 11%. But as volumes go down, such as with the new water conservation ordinance, the total fee paid can actually go down as well, as is in the case with single family residential.
Further questions or comments? Well, I just want to, thank you so much. I know this is a difficult environment we're working in, given how stressed, particularly the Colorado River is. And so just can't thank you enough for all you're doing, and want to thank the volunteers and our water advisory committee for all the work you do. You have closing comments from the chairman?
I would just like to extend thanks to Marshall and Greg and the rest of the staff for all of the work they do in educating the committee and keeping us up to speed on what's going on. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight.
Thank you. Okay, Greg.
All right, should we just keep going on into the city manager proposed budget?
Is there anyone that wants to take a break? Let's then go forward.
Okay, great. Great. Let me share once again. Hopefully everybody can see my slide. Yep. Welcome to the main part of tonight's presentation, the 2023 City Manager's Proposed Budget presentation. Tonight we're going to have an agenda. We're going to have Jim give us some introductory remarks, and then I'm going to come through and do a very quick budget overview, and then you're going to hear from the council and commission appointees, and then back to Jim, and then we're going to finish it up with proposed budgets by issues by DCM. So Jason, Laura, and Roberto will get up and talk as well. So I'll stop here. Jim, is there anything you'd like to say to the crowd before I start off?
Yes, just a few brief remarks. Of course, we've the proposed budget is a balanced budget. It provides sound financial plan for the next year, and we also plan on the out years. So we've been very fortunate. We've had really strong revenue growth since really July of 2020. We've been able to address some really important critical items. However, we do kind of have a caveat there is, I'm sure you all follow the monthly reports that come out from finance, and you'll see that revenue growth is slowing down. We don't expect that strong growth that we've had in the past to continue. So that's a little bit of a downside. The budget that is proposed has broken the threshold of $1 billion, excuse me. That's the all funds budget, including in everything. Our general fund budget is approaching half $1 billion, or about $475,000. So that's a lot of money and a lot of issues to say grace over. Some of those challenges that we're facing, you'll hear about more tonight. But obviously, funding for public safety needs is always a challenge. Also, retaining our public safety employees has been an ongoing challenge for us, as it's been a challenge for our entire employee base. I think in one of the things that we heard about in one of the presentations was the 18% turnover rate. So that continues to be an issue for us. Inflation and supply chains is an ongoing issue. Inflation, I mean, they're tied together. Inflation, with the rates being at the highest levels in 40 years, we're finding costs of providing services and buying commodities, supplies, equipment, and so on. And then on the supply chain side, just the reliability of being able to purchase the things that we knew that we need to have in order to carry out the services we provide. Then, of course, we are continue to grapple with the homelessness situation, with the prohibition for camping. We have increased our capacity to be able to have housing available for those those encampments that are broken up. With the recent trip to Houston, the upcoming trip to San Antonio, we're looking for ways for us to better handle our homeless population and get them into housing and jobs. So big issue. Then finally, we continue to have some struggles in development review, and we are taking measures to address those issues. And then finally, we have created a road maintenance fund to address what has been traditionally a sore point that we have underfunded. And with the plan that we have over the next few years, we will be able to catch up, and you will be seeing a lot of roadway work out there in the community. So with that, I just want to really thank the three citizens committees that you just heard from. That they're very helpful for us in terms of helping guide the direction we go. Also, Mayor and Council, the meetings that we've had with you on looking at the needs that you see for the community and how we can finance those. That's always important. And then also just want to thank the budget office. This is a big task, putting together this proposed budget every year. While you might think it's routine, it's routine, but very time consuming and puts a lot of demands on our staff. So between them and then folks out in the departments that help put together their departmental budgets, we owe thanks to them also. And so with that, I'll just turn it back over to Greg.
Great. Thank you so very much. All right, so the good news for this, I've got about a third of this presentation, but almost all of it is either summary charts or things we've already told you. So I'm going to be going pretty fast through my stuff so you can listen to more interesting people than what you're going to see in here. But I do want to point out some things that we've already talked about. Our approach to the 2023 budget. We've put a lot of money into base adjustments. Less budget for ads than we have in prior years. And when we're talking the base adjustment, we've talked about wages. You'll hear more about that. The inflation, Jim just talked about all the different inflation parts, the risk, the fuel, the contracts, IT showing a lot of that. Our revenue projections are showing some softening in 2023 after several strong years. We're starting to see some of that softening. I'm going to show you that here in a minute. The general fund budget, there's $13.5 million in ads, only $8.8 million ongoing and $4.7 million one time. And what they're part of is the mandates. So we've talked about these mandates before, and you're going to hear them again tonight. Public safety, and then what we're calling other pockets of need. So what you'll see in here, in each group with Jim and the DCMs, they're going to talk about their main mandates, the public safety, and then other pockets of need. We do have a balanced 2023 budget. We do have a 2024 budget or projected budget that's close to balanced. And as long as we can stay fiscally conservative, then we're doing okay with that. Just as a reminder of the investment focuses that we talked to you about during the council one-on-one meetings, we've brought up inflation several times, and so that's a big part of it. Again, public safety funding, police and fire funding over time, the employee retention, engagement, and recruitment. I'm very happy that CBC and us were in lockstep about what we're doing with that. The homelessness, the development review, the transportation, the Colfax BRT, everything that Jim talked about, that's what we're focusing on in the 2023 proposed budget. By the way, let me stop right there. Mayor, do you want us to kind of go through the presentation and then ask questions, or do you want to stop each person and ask questions?
I think unless there's objection from members of the council, let's go through the presentation and then we can have questions.
Great. Okay. Very good. All right. So the general fund all source is $1.1 billion. 40% of that is taxes, mostly in the general fund. 31% of that's charges for service. Most of that's over in your water and wastewater funds. All funds appropriations. General fund takes up about 42% of that 1.1 billion, and water and wastewater, if you add the capital and operating together, you get about 35%, and everything sort of falls off after that. You do now see the transportation maintenance fund in there. That's the new fund that we haven't had before, but now we've got it in there. Our capital improvement plan appropriations by fund, $1.6 billion in the 5-year plan for capital. Vast majority of that is going to be in the water fund and the wastewater fund. And your transportation maintenance 12 and your capital projects is sitting at 10.4. So your general fund sources are somewhat unchanged from prior years. Sales tax is sitting at 57%, and if you include the component use taxes like the capital related use tax and the auto use tax, a full 2/3 of our general fund sources based on somebody buying something. The last time our sales tax rate was increased was 29 years ago. The last time our property tax rate was increased was 22 years ago. So as just a quick reminder, the Leeds School of Business does about 81% of our general fund revenue estimates. They give us multiple forecast scenarios. We went ahead and used the baseline scenario. The baseline scenario, if you want more information on this, there's a great write-up in the revenue section of the budget book going into some detail on each one of these. We use the green line there. It's called the adjusted baseline for our projections with the Leeds. So a little bit about the recent sales tax growth. We've been doing great. We have seen this interesting downturn right here toward the end. From April, May, June, July, you're kind of seeing a bit of a trend down. This June, 8.9% was actually bolstered by some one-time revenue. Remember, I say a lot, use one-time money for one-time purposes. We got some one-time money in here. So realistically, it kind of dropped off to 5% and 4%. That's pretty much what we expect to see. Our 2022 projections sitting at right around 7.2%. Right here is at 9.8. So we kind of need to see 3% growth for the rest of the year. As just a little bit of precursor, it was too late to get into this, but August revenues are going to come in better than that, which is good news for us. And our 2023 projection is going to be sitting somewhere around 2.7%. So we're kind of feeling like that's the right frame of mind for us to be in with this. General fund appropriations, $475.3 million. The pie chart looks consistent with the way it's looked before. About 55, 56% of the expenditures are based on public safety. So the courts and legal, your police, your dispatch, and your fire. A little bit less on the other side. That's pretty typical for Aurora and other municipalities around here in any given year. Just a couple quick points on the general fund budget creation. That base budget's $461.8 million. Quite a bit of money that went into base adjustments. $35.6 million. That's 5% pay increase, personal service adjustment that we put in there. That's the largest that I've seen us put into a base budget in my time here. So, but I truly do believe that it's the right thing to be doing. It's one of the most important things that we've got to be able to handle is getting our people in and getting them working. We've got $20.1 million in other adjustments. The biggest, very biggest piece of that's going to be the CPF transfer. But then also when we've talked about these inflation increases, the utility, the fleet, the risk are into this. And the other big part of this is the department-specific contractual increases. You're going to hear about some big ones as we're going through the different departments, but that makes up the base budget. $3.5 million in ads. I've talked about this a little bit before. 8.8 million ongoing, 4.7 million one time. If you want to, there's a listing of all the ads. It's on page B24. It's attachment 8. And that's going to be driving a lot of what you're going to see here in a little bit are the amendments that you can find in the budget book there. We do have a balanced 2023 proposed budget, so that is good news for us. And the other piece of good news for us is that we've got a 2023 proposed budget, and we are fully funding all of our funds available. So all the components of funds available are fully funded, and we're actually above the 1% to 3% minimum in the operating reserve, which is a good news thing because it's a guard against continued economic uncertainty. We don't really know what's going down the pipe, but it feels like revenues are softening, and we have that projected to soften, but who knows in 6 months if we've guessed the right number of softening. So it's awfully important for us to not spend money that we don't need to spend. And we have funds available sitting there. But here's my other side. Here's my caveat for the other side. The longer term outlook, we're slightly out of balance in 2024. That's close. That's very close. And there's actually some one-time money built into that. So we're doing pretty good. As Jim is going to talk to you about during the one-on-ones, and he's going to talk to you again in a little bit, we've set aside some money, some one-time money for council to use for good news, for good ideas throughout the year. It doesn't just have to be at the Saturday workshop. We'll set it aside for good ideas throughout the year. As long as we stay within that, we're probably doing a pretty good job in terms of getting to the future. If we start adding a lot more, then that $3.1 million is going to increase. Couple summaries. I've already talked about the general fund, but if you take in all the operating funds amendments, you look at about $16.3 million ongoing, $7 million one time, 61.5 FTE built into that. It's about a 3% increase in all funds. And if you look at the staffing, if you include the 9.5 FTE that were added as part of the 2022 spring supplemental, and then you add the 61.5 FTE that you can see in this budget book, that's an addition of 71 FTE, the 2.1% increase. The majority of that's going to be in public safety, and specifically police and fire, but also in parks as well. You'll learn more about that here in a bit. Last but not least, our 5-year capital amendments, a significant amount of capital amendments. $531.7 million. The vast majority of that's going to be in water and wastewater. The CPF is actually going down because of the creation of the Transportation Maintenance Fund, and nearly half of all of the amendments here are in 2027. And what that is, that's the movement of the 5-year plan from 2022 to 2026 to 2023 to 2027. We're adding in those 2027 dollars into the 5-year plan. And if you want to follow along, have any questions on any amendments, you can go to attachment 12, or in the amendment detail in the CIP section has a significant amount of information as well. And with that, the presentation who you're going to hear from tonight, council and commission appointees first, and then Jim's going to get up and he's going to talk about city council, IT mandates, other departmental pockets of need, and then focus on some capital highlights. Then Jason's going to get up and he's going to talk about the issues, so the public safety, the development review, and then he's also got some other pockets of need of things that are happening. And then Laura Perry and Marshall Brown are going to get up and talk. Laura will talk about employee retention, engagement, recruitment, bringing up the transportation again. Also talk about some other departmental pockets of need, and then capital highlights specific to public works and parks. And then Marshall's going to get up and give you some water and wastewater highlights of their budget. And we're going to finish it off, last but not least, with Roberto talking about homelessness, and then he's got some other departmental pockets of need.
I want to take a break right now and just stop the action right now to see if there are any council members that have any questions.
Okay.
On what's been presented so far. Let me start. I have one, and that is, I'm concerned about the size of our reserves. There is no question that given supply chain issues and the fact that we've been rained on with money from Washington, D.C., that there's inflationary pressures that have caused the Fed to move up on interest rates, and I don't think we're done doing that. And so, they're doing that to cool the economy down. My guess is they're going to slow the economy down enough potentially to put us in a recession. And so, what you're saying is our reserves are not necessarily adequate now, projecting out based on your current assumptions. And I think your current, and I think that it could be worse than your assumption. But go ahead, please.
No, perhaps so. Absolutely. So a great example. That's 1 to 3% of the operating reserve. And yeah, if we have a harder time than a 2.7% up in 2023, we would need to dig into those operating reserves. So I think your points are well met in terms of that.
Well, I think, can you come up with some additional assumptions based on a recession that would dictate a greater, that would cause us to look at a greater reserve?
I can give you some feels for that. So let's say that every 1% of revenue is right around $5 million. So if we're off by 1% in our revenues, then we would need to go find $5 million. And we have a balanced budget, which means that we don't have ongoing funds sitting around doing nothing. So depending on the strength of your recession, if we're off by 2%, if we have flat revenue, then we're looking at cutting, 10 plus $15 million in 2020.
Okay. So I think what I like is for you to go beyond your assumptions of where they are in this presentation. Okay. And come up with some scenarios that council could look at that would require greater reserves.
Okay.
So that, because generally, the pressure on government, it's an inverse relationship with the economy. Is if the economy goes down, pressure on governmental services goes up. We saw that during COVID, and so I think I want to really be cautious about this to make sure that we have adequate reserves. I was in small business when there was a downturn in the I think in the 80s, in the latter 80s, and the city of Aurora, to preserve its budget, turned on the business community at the time when we least could afford it. So where the city of Aurora wasn't doing layoffs, my firm had to as a result of that. And so very concerned about that, so that we're prepared for the potential for significant downturn. Any other questions or comments? Okay, please proceed.
All right. Then we're going to go ahead and start out with the city attorney, Mr. Brotzman.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. There are a number of programs and changes driving some increases to our budget this year. The first being the IGA with the U.S. Attorney's Office that Council entered into again earlier this year. That there's an FTE dedicated to providing services in federal court under the supervision of the U.S. Attorney. Statutorily, there was a change in Colorado regarding 48-hour bond hearings. That's driving contract costs for an attorney for those bond hearings, and then current staffing of our victim witness liaison and secretarial support for that program as well. Under the water fund, and Marshall may or may not mention this a little later, there is an additional paralegal. Again, the change in this area is a retirement of John Dingus, our longtime water attorney. So we're bringing more of the water legal issues in-house and supervising those issues. We will still be using our outside firms, but more of that, the control over those issues is being brought in-house. The other factor that's out there is we're establishing a STEP program that's very, very similar to the STEP program that the police officers currently use. Our prosecutors aren't really keeping up internally, stepwise. They start at a higher rate, but end up at a lower salary at about 5 years out. So we're looking at a step plan. Part of that is the attorney's office experimented in previous years with the performance plan, and there are lots of pieces of the performance plan that we're keeping and are beneficial. There wasn't a funding piece to that, so we're stumbling. Part of that is impacting our first line entry level prosecutors. We are severely behind. We have I think 7 or 8 prosecutorial positions that are open. The good news on the openings is it'll help fund the STEP plan that we're putting into place, but that's something, it's a critical level that we have to address. So that's going to be one of our major focuses is both retaining our prosecutors and getting new prosecutors in.
All right. Thank you.
Questions on this section? Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation.
All right. Next up, we'll go with court admin. Candace, please.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Candace Atkinson, the court administrator. We project that for 2022, we will be have a balanced budget. We did receive a $300,000 supplemental to cover our body cams. And we also have some savings due to vacancy savings that we're looking at spending on some safety concerns in the detention center. Next slide, please. For 2023, we do have one added position that we are planning on using vacancy savings to cover, and that's for a deputy court administrator to help with succession planning and also when the court administrator is not available. And we do have some added costs, as you've heard from other departments, due to the state mandated weekend court to cover. We're planning on using our current staff and using either some changes in scheduling or overtime. And I am also asking for consideration for an additional $370,000 for some late pay adjustments for our detention staff. And this is based on just the staff that was currently employed when we did the compensation study. So if we do get fully staffed, I would have more than a $370,000 deficit that is not in my current budget. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe refer to Greg. Greg, have you accounted for this potential, this deficit as we become fully staffed?
Yeah, and you're saying specifically about the $370,000?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the way that the reason that this is here and we typically cover it in the next year, and this is budget guy being a bad guy. We do what's called a snapshot. And we say, as of this date, we take a snapshot, and because we fully fund all of our positions, we fully fund all of the positions, and life still keeps working, but then I have to stop the numbers from moving or else my hair gets even more gray. So I sit there and I say, okay, after this, any things that change after the snapshot, we'll handle it in the next snapshot. And this was part of a next snapshot. That being said, we would cover it in 2020, in 2023 or 2024. It would be part of the 2024 budget, and it would be on us or them to be able to cover it in 2023. I will say, for one thing, we don't actually take vacancy savings from any of the council appointees, and so we don't take their budget from them during the year like we do with other operating departments, not police and fire, civil service, but everything else we take some vacancy savings.
Okay, further questions of Court Administrator?
Mayor Kaufman?
Councilmember Lawson.
Yes, Candace, in the budget, where is the budget item, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at it, for any kind of technological changes? I don't know if you're doing, I mean, if there's some kind of study being done, or if there's going to be, outsourcing, but I don't see that in the budget at all.
I came in too late in the budget to add anything. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm asking for consideration for some of these salary adjustments. But in the event that we go forward, we'd have to do it as a supplemental.
And
if I could add, Councilmember Lawson, within the IT budget, we have $100,000 to do an evaluation. Both the court administrator and city attorney's office through prosecution have are looking at technology improvements. And since these improvements generally touch on police, court administration, city attorney's office, public defender's office, and judicial, we want to make sure that we look at that in a holistic fashion so that we're not buying technology that doesn't talk to other technology. And so we thought that putting the $100,000 in for the evaluation that I think you mentioned in your question would be a wise thing to do.
Okay, can I just do a follow-up, Mayor Kaufman?
Please.
To Mr. Twombly. So I understand for the evaluation, I know that there was some work done internally with our IT department, but the courts are heavily papered. You're doing an evaluation, is there any pieces that we can maybe put in the budget where something can be done, or you're kind of looking at things from a holistic point of view, but the court is papered completely? I mean, I'm just wondering, why isn't there anything in here to kind of maybe address some things that could be done immediately to help the court with efficiencies?
Well, yeah, and I'm not sure that anything could be done immediately. We have Julie Heckman has in prosecution. That's where the paper issue is. There is a state system that she has looked at getting for the city to be able to get onto that system. The cost for that would be close to $1 million. And so the court administrator also has a need for a case management system. And her estimate there is about $400,000. And so, if we're talking about getting into spending over, close to $1.3 million on technology, it seems prudent to figure out, to do some research to find out what we need to do. I think it would be a good idea to put some money in for eventual technology acquisition. And I'm not sure what that number is. And I think we probably need to talk with both Candace and Julie Heckman about that. But at this point in time, we don't know what that number really is, I'm afraid.
Well, I think that should be explored. So that's just an opinion coming from myself. So.
Agreed.
Candy, can you comment on that?
I'm sorry, Mayor, you want me to comment on that?
That's good.
Yeah, we've actually been doing some exploring with Julie, and my concern is, if we go out to a consultant, that it's going to be a delay, and we're really ready to move at this point. And I feel like we have the people in place that know to answer or to ask the right questions to make sure our systems can talk. So that's what my concern is. I think it's just like anybody else. We want to do it as quickly as possible because of the benefits that will come with that, not only to our department, but the rest of the city as well.
Okay. Further questions or comments? Court Administrator, Councilmember Sundberg.
Yes, sir. Thank you. For Jim, the consultant for $100,000, how long is that expected to take?
Well, we'd have to get somebody on board first. And so it would take a while, but I think that I think we could get through that. And if we had funding in 2023, we could potentially be able to go out for acquisition of whatever the technology is that we need there. And, this, like I said, this is something that impacts all the different departments there. This paper issue that Councilmember Lawson talks about, obviously we've got records technician printing out reams and reams of paper that then gets over to the prosecutors, and it's a real issue. And we heard about this. I mean, we've heard about this for a long time, and it has not been. It's never been resolved, and I think we need to make the commitment to resolve this issue, and do it as quickly as possible. But we also want to be smart when we do it.
I hear you on that one, Jim. I know this has been a long-term problem where maybe this is overly simplified by thinking this way, but when we were looking for a court administrator, we obviously were looking through the lens of the technological knowledge aspect and hoping that that candidate would have that knowledge and experience working with certain systems. And I was thinking that we would just be along the lines of relying on the court administrator to know of systems that are working out there within other municipalities without overthinking it, without overstudying it too much, really be able to implement something. And I know, of course, it has to sync up with other departments and work hand in hand in that fashion, but we've been living in the 20th century on this for so long. I thought that by now we would be able to move at the speed of business, so to speak. Yeah.
Let me go to Councilmember Coombs, and then I want to go back to the court administrator.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So following up on the question of doing an assessment of technology, I know we also had a discussion earlier this year about doing an assessment of the city attorney's office, and maybe also can do that assessment of the court as we have a new person coming in to a system that's kind of been the way it's been and developing for many years, just looking at how we can make sure that this entire system, right? The public defender has had an assessment done, doing that also for the courts and the city attorney's office, so that we have a really clear picture of what we're working with as we look at the paper to technology issue, but also other systems that we have in place. So I know we talked about that earlier this year. Can we look at what the cost would be to add, instead of just the technology assessment, and overall assessment of the court and the city attorney's office?
Let me defer back to the court administrator.
I know that there's a lot of caseload studies, and sometimes, at the municipal level, there's less studies done on how much it takes per case. But that's certainly something that we could explore. I feel like, most systems now have import and export modules, and it's just a matter of when, you talk to the vendor, they tell you exactly the specifics of what you need to do that. So I think even just talking to the vendors and working together, we would know what systems, what we need to make them communicate. And if we, have to do some, changes, that would be part of the process and the purchasing. But I don't think with the court systems, most of them are already built to do that, with both records and with the city attorneys.
Let me remind the council that the court administrators are direct report to mayor and council and not to the city manager. Just for reference. Further discussion.
Mayor Kaufman, just have a comment.
Councilmember Lawson.
We come up with money for everything else in this city, and I think our courts are very important. I think this has been lacking for I don't know. I've been on council for 7 years, but probably even prior to that. And I think putting an investment of 1.4 million or whatever we can do, even if it may be half of that or something, to get this moving so we can get our courts efficiently moving. They're great. We have a great court. But to get them efficiently moving in the direction of where we need for technology, I think for me, that's worth the investment. We come up for money for everything else in this city, but we can't invest in this. So I strongly support whatever we can do. And I don't know, we can talk more about it once at the budget workshop, but there needs to be money allocated towards the courts moving forward in technology.
Further discussion on court administration.
Mayor.
I'm sorry, Councilmember
Coombs. So I agree with Councilmember Lawson. We're going to have to find this money. So we should be having a conversation about where we're going to find it sooner rather than later. But I also did have a specific question, which I guess goes to both the court administrator and the city attorney of can you all bring some numbers to the budget workshop around the cost of doing an assessment of your officer?
What is the scope of an assessment? I'm sorry. Councilmember Combs, could you clarify?
So certainly the workload aspects of the caseload study, as well as looking at some of these staffing issues that have been raised by both appointees. So staffing, recruitment, retention, training, costs, and we can look at the scope of, whatever number of years you all think that scope should cover.
Okay, very well. Any closing comments, court administrator?
No, thank you.
Greg, we'll proceed to the next one.
All right. Judicial.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to bring forth the judicial budget. Before I begin, I'd like to personally thank Greg and Jackie for all the work that they've done in helping with the judicial budget. I sincerely appreciate it. You have the slide in front of you, but before we get to the slide, I'd like to provide a couple comments as to just the last conversation that you had with Candace and the amount of paper that we have in the court. I've said it before and I'll say it today. We are at a critical stage. And when I say critical, I mean absolute critical stage of getting e-discovery for our court. Let me give you the example of what happened today in court. We had 27 jury trials, I believe, that were set. Out of the 27, 3, we had to conduct hearings in the middle of the jury call, dealing with the lack of providing discovery. And each and every one of those cases, the public defender moved to dismiss the case in front of me. And so we had 3 potential challenges to where a case where there were victims present, where the case was subject to being dismissed because of non-compliance with discovery. Now, those 3 cases, I did not grant the motions to dismiss. We granted other remedies and the cases were going forward. But I can't emphasize it enough that each and every day, this is happening in our court when we're talking about the inability to provide e-discovery. And the court, the size of our court, where we have 91 days to bring a case to trial within the statutory period. Unlike state court, where there's 6 months, we have 91 days. Not to have e-discovery in place is causing critical challenges to individual cases where the request, the remedy that's being requested is that the case be dismissed. So I highlight this because there has been discussions about consultants and such. We're at critical stage in our court.
Judge,
Happy to answer any questions about that.
so, Chief Judge, is that a function of staffing or information management systems, the problem that you mentioned, referenced in discovery?
It's a great question, Mayor. It's probably a combination of both, just from what Mr. Brotzman said, for the number of prosecutors that are down within their office. But at the same time, it's a system-wide issue. We've been talking about e-discovery for 5 years. Promises have been made to this court for the implementation of e-discovery that were not kept. And Mayor, I'm telling you that we're facing these dismissal challenges almost every day.
Real quick, questions from council? Comments?
Mayor, if I could just interject something here. At Public Safety Committee meeting last October, Court IT said that they would have the e-discovery system up and running by April 1st of this year, and that didn't happen. And so that, I just, for context, I feel that's very important. Court IT has been in charge of getting an e-discovery system up and running, and we are where we are today, as Judge Day is describing. And that's part of I just feel like city IT needs to be involved in this process, whether we get a consultant or not, but it affects, with all the operations that it affects in the court and judicial system, we understand the urgency of it. We just need to get moving. So just
questions or comments from council?
Mayor,
Councilmember O'Connell.
I don't think he did. It was Zavonic.
That was not me, sir.
It was Zavonic and one of the others. I didn't hear who else, but I'm happy to defer to whoever.
Okay, Councilmember Zavonic, please proceed.
Okay. So I guess as we talk about IT, both with judicial and the court administration and judicial and all of these different areas, one of the things I want to bring up for conversation, I think it's critical that we treat IT as a shared capability, that there is one IT that is a shared capability for the entire city. And I think that how we get there is going to be important, but I think that at the end of the day, having a patchwork of IT departments in different departments across the city is inefficient and is not going to lead to the best outcomes, both in terms of cost, in terms of integration of capabilities across the city. So I hope that the direction we move forward is one of which we have one capability, the IT department, that does all of these things and provides a shared service for the various departments.
Okay. Further questions or comments?
Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you. It's me this time for real. I actually just wanted to say that I agree with Councilmember Zavonic's comments. This is actually something that I've discussed with the city manager and the court administrator and Judge Day as well. I do think that we're dealing with a lot of inefficiency. We have a lot of silos. And from an IT perspective, this is a vulnerability in our operations, but also it's a disservice to our residents, especially folks who are involved in our criminal legal system. So I would like to see a consolidation sooner rather than later. The charter actually does provide for an avenue to do so. I'm happy to discuss that if you all are interested. But at the very, very least, we need some serious coordination and collaboration as soon as possible.
Okay. Further questions or comments?
Mayor.
Councilmember Combs.
Thank you. So Judge Day, I just wanted to clarify the issues, the delays to victims and defendants related to discovery, is that only or primarily due to technology, or are there other issues happening within the system that are resulting in kind of these discovery issues that are taking place within the court?
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Coombs, for the question. I'd have to defer to the city attorney as to manpower resource within their department, but as to the process of providing the discovery, it's just that. It's the process. It's still done by paper, and it's not done in an electronic form. The state's been on electronic discovery for quite some time. And that's why I think that there was some important discussions as to partnering with the state. I think there's still opportunity for additional conversations that could take place with other cities to share in the costs of implementation of the action e-discovery within municipal courts. I've already had discussions with 4 other jurisdictions about their interest in just having conversations about partnering and sharing with the costs. I think that those could carry on and be very fruitful without the assistance of a consultant. But it's the process. It's not necessarily just the people.
Okay. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, any closing comments, Judge?
You see my 2023 budget, we are requesting a halftime FTE. It's just a conversion of what a current employee is to a part-time FTE. It's a $0 impact to the general fund. And of course, just as has already been made comment to, we are under a mandate starting January 1 to have weekend court. We, the Judicial Department, will be servicing that weekend court with our relief team members to try to provide the service in the most fiscally responsible way.
Very well, thank you. Okay, Greg next.
Civil service.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Well, it's been another busy year for the Civil Service Commission in 2022. For the 3rd straight year, the Commission has exhausted all qualified entry-level police applicants to find as many recruits as possible for the 4 police academies. And this is in addition to providing entry-level fire recruits for 2 large fire academies in 2022. Going forward into 2023 and beyond, the Civil Service Commission budget will be directly impacted by what decisions are made in upcoming consent decree discussions. The Civil Service Commission will hear the recommendations from the outside expert when they are ready and proceed from there. And then the impact of these decisions may necessitate a supplemental request in 2023. And with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Questions of Mr. Kane? Seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation. Appreciate it. Next,
Public defender.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Doug Wilson. I am the public defender. Well, we've had a little discussion about us already today, so this will be interesting. I'm happy to answer any questions. I want to give you just a little bit of history before we go into the 2 budget slides. The assessment that's been discussed, and I'm sorry to hear the mayor say he doesn't think it was independent. That came about because there originally was money in the budget to do an assessment of our office, the city attorney's office, and the court system. In 2019, so I started in 20, and that money went away during COVID. You all took it back. And so the assessment that was done by the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association that we turned over to the city in September of 2021 actually came from a grant that I applied for with the Bureau of Justice Assistance through the Department of Justice. DOJ hired National Legal Aid and Defenders Association, not us, and it didn't cost the city anything for that assessment. Out of that assessment, there were 22 recommendations, and 2 of those, which I thought were pretty important to get us started on, dealt with getting a workload assessment I told many of you when I first started that I believe in making resource requests based on data. We just finished that workload assessment. A company called Uncommon did it. I'd worked with them in the past when I was the state public defender on workload assessments that we provided to the state legislature for funding requests. And so I thought it was a good idea to try them again, to use them because they knew what they were doing. We have a case management system that we started a year and a half ago, and we'd never had a case management system. And part of that involves timekeeping. And so we track all of our time on every case. So I can tell you exactly how much time it takes per case as it relates to both general case time and specific case time. Why am I telling you this? Because the request, if you take a look at the slide here in front, the first slide, it talks about a budget increase of $1 million. But that's not our ask. It's 79% of that, if you'll flip to the next slide, please. 79% of that is either comes from the compensation plan, which is citywide. So it's a state or a city mandated, city funded. 37% is one of the suggestions, recommendations is that we help develop a mental health program in our office with the courts, with the city attorney's office, which now has been developed, called Aurora Sustained, which some of you have read about. It's in cooperation with both Aurora Mental Health Center and University of Denver Psychology Department. We've been able to procure almost $500,000 in grants over the past 2 years. And in 2023, that's 37% goes into our budget. But again, it's not costing the city. It's a grant-funded program to help us and the courts with both competency evaluations and referrals over to Aurora Mental Health, which has been extremely successful. We go into court every morning and do an evaluation of folks that were arrested the night before, the weekend before, for their mental health needs, and get referrals over to Aurora Mental Health, who are with us on a daily basis as well. 11% then is 1 FTE for the state mandate of the weekend courts that we have to pick up. And when that statute was up, I actually opposed not the theory, but the lack of funding for the program by the state, which obviously they didn't listen, and that's been passed on to us. So bottom line is, from the assessment, the mental health suggestion, recommendation, and the workload assessment were done. And from that workload assessment comes the 2 FTEs that we are asking you all to fund because of the increase in the workload that we have had over the past year. And we're going to see an increase further, I believe, in the coming year. So that's
anything else, sir? If not, questions or comments from staff, from council members?
Mayor Zvonek.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, Doug, thanks for this. One of the questions I have on the weekend mandate, and I understand that it was a unfunded mandate from the state on a variety of, but do you expect there to be more cases as a result of having the weekend?
I don't think, well, that's a double-edged sword. I think we're going to get more cases. As you know, I think we're going to get more cases anyway. I don't know if it's going to be because of the weekend. I actually think in some ways the weekend court is going to cut down on the craziness that we see on Mondays and Tuesdays.
Right.
But I have to have staff to cover those weekends.
Could there be an adjustment of schedule to cover that, knowing that we have to cover?
Not at the same time saying I need new staff or more staff to cover the caseload I already have. That's my problem. We're already maxed out, council member, and you're now adding
But for you're asking for 2 plus 1 for the weekend, and so my question is on the weekend. So if, let's say theoretically you got the other 2, would you still need the weekend, given that you're not actually increasing your caseload as a result of the weekend?
The 2 I'm asking for is because of the increase in the caseload today. The weekend is because of the increase in the coverage on the weekends of an entirely different court that we've never had to pick up. So we're going to be there 63 additional days plus the prep and the post court time. And that's the reason for that FTE request. It's solely because of that state mandate. If we didn't have that state mandate doing weekend court, I wouldn't be asking obviously for that position.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of, but you're going to have the same amount of cases. Again, I understand that there's an assumption that there will be some additional ones because of some of the ordinances we passed, but in terms of the number of cases as a result of the weekend requirement, it's just that what would have been there Monday and Tuesday is now going to be there over the weekend. So I don't see there being more cases. Now I see a need for a schedule adjustment. Second question is, do you have an idea of roughly what you're talking about $2.9 million. And I believe Colorado Springs, which is a bigger city, fewer cases, I acknowledge, but it's about a $600,000 budget that they spend on public defense. So what is our per case cost?
Well, that's a great question and an interesting question. It's interesting you asked me that because I was just trying to do the math before we came on. But can we talk about Colorado Springs for a minute and then I'll come back to I just received the citizens report. I think it was August 30th. So I didn't know that was coming. I didn't talk to those folks beforehand. I talked to Mr. Scott afterwards. We actually spoke on the 15th. And Colorado Springs wasn't mentioned in the recommendations. It was the state public defender or ADC. And so I looked at the math from that perspective. ADC charges $80 an hour. Our average hourly cost is about $47 an hour for our attorneys.
Right. But what do we spend per case?
I got to do that math. I'm happy to get that back to you. I actually have to sit down and do that math because I wasn't looking at Springs because it wasn't in that recommendation.
I think this goes to the mayor's point about the need for an assessment that actually looks at it, because I do agree with what Councilmember Coombs said earlier and what you've suggested, which is that as Aurora continues to take a more proactive stance on crime, we're going to see an increased number of people who are going to need the public defender, and whether that's an internal or a contract, it's going to be needed. And as we've discussed, given that the kind of the bumpy waters we're heading towards economically, we want to make sure if we could save several $1 million on public defense and still provide adequate public defense for those who need it, that would be a good thing for us to know. Now, that might not be the case, but I think a third-party analysis of what are some of the ways that other municipalities, because I think what was mentioned by the CABC report was that we are one of only 2 cities in the state that actually do this, the other one being Denver. So it's clearly not unusual, and then people do get public defense using the contract model or the contract system. So I think we should explore that and get those numbers. So I think having that for our budget workshop would be helpful.
Having a per case number or per case costs? Yeah. Okay. But let me answer a couple of questions you just brought up. First, I went back and looked at our start back from 1991. There was an attempt to privatize in 1997. It was found not to be cost effective. There was an attempt to privatize in 2004, and it was found not to be cost effective. And there was a similar attempt to change the structure of our commission system in 2016, and it wasn't cost effective. So this isn't the first time this has been brought up, and it's always been found to be not cost effective to take it outside of staffed public defender's office because of the number of cases and the efficiencies that we offer, as well as the effectiveness. Colorado Springs does from my understanding from talking to Mr. Scott, they pay $175 an hour to private counsel with a guaranteed 2 hours per case. And that's it. I mean, you can apparently ask for more money if you want, but they're only paying them for 2 hours on a case. We're spending on domestic violence cases about 5.6 hours. So, and I think we do a pretty good, both efficient and effective representation, as our enabling ordinance requires, that we have to provide representation that's commensurate with folks that have money and can afford counsel.
Right.
So that's a mandate to us, which is what we do.
Can I just have just one last question? You'd mentioned, and I appreciate that there had been previous looks at this. When did you say the last one was?
In 2016, there was an attempt to change the, to move the Public Defender Commission, I believe, under City Manager's Office and restructure the entire system. And that did not seem to make any sense.
But the size of the office has probably doubled, right, since then?
No, it hasn't doubled. I mean, when I think I came in, we had, well, in 2020, we had 15 employees, 15 and a half, and we're now at asking for 2 plus the 1 for weekend to go to 20. So no, it hasn't doubled.
Okay.
I don't know what the size was in 1991. You know, when you all council changed it to a commission-based public defender system in December of 1991. It started then in 92. I don't know what the size was then, but we certainly haven't significantly increased either in budget or in size.
Further questions?
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
So my question is about the cost and the time, because not cost per case, but cost per hour. So Mr. Wilson said about $47 per hour. And I would imagine that it varies depending on the case, right? Maybe there are some cases that could be resolved with only a couple hours of representation, and others that demand much more extensive kind of work to represent. So can you comment on that? Because you have the hourly cost. Can you just comment on kind of the amount of time it takes to provide quality representation on different types of cases?
Sure. And if you take a look at, if you have an opportunity, if you don't have it, I'm happy to provide it to you. The workload assessment that we just completed in August and we provided to the budget department. It's why we call workload not caseloads. You can have one case. Let's just take a routine theft case where it's a security camera, a client, and that's it. That's a relatively easy case to prepare for. If you have a theft case with 10 officers' body cams, the workload goes up significantly, and the paper, God bless the paper, and the DVDs that have to come over to us from the city attorney's office, that workload goes up significantly. So when you talk about, that's why I don't like talking about caseloads, because caseloads aren't as important as workloads. And when you have two similar type cases, but with a significantly higher degree of discovery that has to be turned over, then the workload's going to go up. DV cases, which we have way too many of in Aurora, that's the type of cases that are going to be our biggest workload. We're averaging 5.6 hours. If you go to a citation and what would be called a probation revocation, we spend about 2.9 hours on that, and because it's going to be less involvement, because it's not a jury trial, it's not a beyond a reasonable doubt finding, etc. But the complexity of the cases have increased significantly over the years, both because of the types of charges, body cams, which are great tools, but they're also extremely time intensive when you're looking at those to review them for preparation for a case. Hope that answers.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Greg, we'll move on then.
Great. So with that, we're gonna switch gears a little bit and hand it over to Jim Twombly.
Thanks, Greg. So we'll talk about the city council budget, then IT operating and capital budget, and then other other needs. City Council, there's the proposed budget for the City Council, and as Greg had mentioned earlier, it includes $3 million in one-time set aside for council to determine how best to use. And as Greg said, this doesn't need to be completely allocated at the budget workshop. But it sounds like we've already had some discussion tonight about some needs that may be proposed. So that money is there and available for council to, again, to determine how to spend. Information technology, we have $4 million in base adjustments, and that includes restarting the computer replacement program, which had been in hiatus. We've got 1.7 in adjustments for Axon Technology. Axon, of course, is our body-worn camera provider, also provides our tasers, and we're adding on to that contract for some enhanced properties in the body-worn cameras. And we're also adding drones, drone training, and video storage for drones. The cybersecurity program is funded through the 911 fund is, again, just the emphasis on the cybersecurity issues that both government and private sector employers are facing. And then there's that court study that was talked about earlier, that there's $100,000 there. And, Judge Day talked about potential for cooperation or coordination with other municipal courts to kind of piggyback onto the state system that's already out there. And so, if we have an ability to do that, that $100,000 could certainly go towards whatever is applied towards getting onto that state system. Capital highlights, other capital highlights, we have radio infrastructure. The city's 800 megahertz radio system was designed in 2015. Since that time, as you know, we've grown, and in order to expand that and provide coverage throughout the southeast area of the city for our first responders, we need to spend some dollars on that upgrade. And then also police and fire both use mobile data computers in their response vehicles to receive and respond to calls. These devices are on a 5-year replacement cycle. And so we need to replace the police MDCs in 2023. Okay. Then we also have an FTE and for Americans with Disabilities project manager. We're in the midst of a ADA transition plan study. A couple of years ago, we realized that we had fallen behind in keeping up with ADA changes and regulations and laws. And the way to keep up with that is last year, or for the current year, we had budgeted for the transition plan study. We're in the midst of that, as I said. And what we found was that by not having this responsibility of keeping up with the ADA, that we have fallen behind. We need that responsibility really focused in one area. This is necessary in order for us to be able to serve our residents who have different forms of disability with our programs, our services, and our facilities. So we expect to know probably towards next summer, like next fall, have a final plan in place, and we will need somebody to be in charge of implementing that plan. And we would expect that we will be seeing budget needs in future years in order to be able to make the changes that will be required. And then finally, the council passed a campaign finance and lobbying ordinance. And in order to implement that, we need to acquire software to help us track all the things that we need to be tracking for that. Okay.
And that is your last slide. Do we?
Any questions?
Questions?
Mayor Zavonic?
Councilmember Zavonic.
Just a question on this last point, Jim. Is there an ability for us, and I know that most at the state and other local governments use Tracer, right, which is made available to the Secretary of State, and I don't know if we're able to contract. I don't know how other governments, but I know that whether you're running for county office or state office, Tracer is available through the Secretary of State's office, and I don't know if we have the ability or not, but it would seem something that's already widely used and available might make sense if we're able to.
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that, but we'll run that down.
Further questions?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Just a comment on the Tracer question. That's something that we had inquired about in the past, and I believe that it just came out to be more expensive, but maybe that's changed. We'll see what the options are.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. It's nice to use a system that everyone's familiar with.
Yeah.
And also just to comment on that, the lobbyist system is not connected to Tracer, and Tracer was outsourced. So that's why probably the cost is more expensive than it was internal, wherein the lobbyist registration was built in-house.
Okay. Further questions or comments on this section? Seeing none, any closing remarks? Jim?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Very well. The time is now 7:21. We will take a short break and return at 7:30. Council stands in recess. Greg, please proceed.
All right, I will bring up Jason Batchelor.
Thank you, Greg. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'm going to go ahead and go through three different priorities within the budget and kind of walk those through you, and we'll see if there's any questions. So next slide. So with public safety, sort of the three traditional public safety agencies are Aurora 911, the fire department, and police. If you're following along in your budget, Aurora 911 is on page F20, fire is on page F62, and police is on page F155. So starting with police, the budget includes 12 additional uniformed officers and 6 additional civilians in 2023. And then in response to the resolution that council passed regarding public safety, the 2023 budget does transition the crisis response team from grant funding to be fully funded by the general fund. And the 2023 budget includes funding for 5 crisis response team units. So it'd be 5 officers and 5 clinicians, as well as 2 mobile response team units, which would be a paramedic and a clinician. And then in addition, there's funding for a program manager, a case manager, and a data analyst in the 2023 budget. The budget also includes additional funding for training and provides the lease purchase funding for the Bearcat vehicles, which were ordered earlier this year. And then finally, the 5-year outlook includes additional funding each year for additional staffing for the police department. So the next slide is fire. The budget includes funding for 4 additional firefighters for a 24-hour logistics and support. Those staff will staff the new air lighten truck that will provide direct logistics support in the field for our firefighters on scene. Additionally, the budget does include funding for EMS equipment and supplies that have experienced significant cost increases and inflationary increases over the last year. And then similar to police, finally, the budget does include funding for an additional fire and truck company in 2024. And so those are reflected in the numbers that Greg had shown you. And then I won't talk about weekend court. You've already heard from the principles associated with the municipal court in terms of the impacts. So you've seen those numbers. Next slide. So the budget also includes investments in non-traditional public safety departments. So the parks budget includes funding for additional security at recreation centers and Del Mar Pool. It also adds 5 park rangers for additional daytime patrols in our parks and trails. And it does include funding for nighttime security patrols by a private security company at our parks and trails as well. We know that's something that council has heard a lot from our community about in those concerns. We think these investments in the Parks Department are public safety related, and our rangers are great force multipliers for our police department. So I want to go ahead and highlight those as part of our public safety investments. Go ahead, next slide. Development reviews, the next area we'll be talking about. So the development review fund summary is on page E18. The Planning and Development Services Department budget is on page F146. The Office of Development Assistance is on page F74. And then Public Works, the other major agency in the development review, is on page F175. So we are utilizing the findings and recommendations from the Red Tape Reduction Committee to drive changes in the development review area. And the 2023 budget reflects funding for the additional staff and the organizational changes that we've made as part of those red tape reductions. And then we're going to be reporting to PED in October, so next month, on the status of those ongoing improvements related to development review. Quick word here that workloads and development activity are similar at this point to where they were last year. As Jim noted, we're monitoring all of our revenues very closely and for the impacts of inflation and any economic slowdowns that have been talked about. And we've just started to see over the last couple of months that perhaps in some areas we might start to see some slowdown in development activity, but it's something we're monitoring very closely. But overall, our workloads and development activity remain very high through the first 8+ months of the year. And then finally, next slide. We do have a few other pockets of need. We know that council has identified support for small businesses as a major priority. And so the budget does include an additional position as the Associate Director of the Small Business Development Center as well in the budget. So with that, those are my major areas, and I'll answer any questions you have or pass it on to Laura.
Okay, let me see. Let me ask a couple, then I'll turn to the rest of the council.
Yes, sir.
I thought SBDC was an independent, that we were just hosting them. I didn't know that they were FTEs of the city.
So they are FTEs of the city. They are grant funded through federal grants that we receive. So the staffing, the city does ask as a fiscal agent, and so they are grant funds and therefore FTEs of the city.
Okay, there was on the police budget, there was a 2017 study that essentially identified positions in the department that could be handled by civilians, so that post-certified officers can get out on the street. It seems like we are not making much progress in that. Could you comment on that?
Sure. Actually, we've actually made a number of progress over the years in terms of that. So I think this civilian unit is one of them. We actually added a couple positions in the spring supplemental associated with the impound lot. That was another area that was identified with them. And then we're also looking at some additional areas coming up, whether those are public information officers or some other things, but it's something that we continue to look at, Mr. Mayor, for opportunities for civilians that can put officers directly back on the road.
Where are we with non-injury auto accident investigations?
So that is what we had 6 positions added for in the budget this year. Those positions have been advertised for. We've hired. We have the first couple of them that are out right now doing ride-alongs. The other 2 positions are sort of completing that training. And then we anticipate those joining those 2. So we anticipate that they're going to stand up here in the next few weeks. And then we're actually in anticipation of these positions in the budget. We've gone back out and are looking to go ahead. And if we can get ahead of this, we're going to hire these additional 6 positions so that unit could be hopefully fully staffed here by the end of the year, beginning part of next year. And we can really start to see some significant impact. So it's taken us a while to get those stand up. We face some of the same challenges that everybody has in terms of hiring qualified candidates, but the department has got them on board now. We've got the equipment, we've got the training package, we've got the uniforms, and so we're starting to see those folks hit the road.
Okay, and I've noticed that there are some very small academy classes. So to accelerate the process of staffing, we had multiple classes going on at the same time, but yet those classes seem relatively small. What is the feeling right now? Are you going to consolidate those to larger classes as they were before? Or are we going to keep doing very small classes?
We actually just talked about that a little bit today with Captain Moody, who's out at the academy, and it's something that they're looking at. I think their early preferences, they would like to go to perhaps a little bit fewer academies next year, go to perhaps larger, give the Civil Service Commission a little time to catch their breath, give academy staff time to catch their breath between academies. The challenge for that will be that you'll have a little bit longer between academies, and there's a possibility that you might lose a candidate because another agency would have an academy start there. So that was a nice thing about us having 5 academies throughout the year, was that we always pretty much had an academy right around the corner. And so we had a very low risk of losing somebody to another agency because they started an academy before us. But because of some of the challenges, if you noted, about having small academies, because of sort of the constant churn and burn associated with that, I think it's something the department's looking at. We've not made that final decision, but it's something they're looking real strongly at this point. Dan, I see you on. Is there anything to add to that one?
No, Jason, I think you've covered that well.
All right, thanks, sir.
Final question is, on these academies, police and fire, we have no requirement when they graduate that they have to work for a department for a certain period of time, or that they reimburse the city for some of the costs of their training. And is there, because I was just with AFR doing a 24-hour shift earlier this month. And I think, and one of the, this could be anecdotal, I don't know, but one of the firefighters told me about a recent graduate, the person that graduated from the department, from the academy, AFR Academy, and took a job with another department. You know, and that obviously, if that was true, he was in discussions while he was attending our academy at the taxpayers' expense of our residents. And so I wonder if you can, and I understand that there are some departments that actually do that. Have a requirement.
You're correct, Mr. Mayor. We do spend a significant amount of time, effort, and funds to get both police and fire fully trained up. That's something I think we can look at. I will certainly get with HR and with the legal department and both departments to see if that's something that we could do, because you're right, it is a significant investment, and certainly we would like to see that investment repaid. But let us look into that, Mr. Mayor, and we'll get back to you with some written answers on terms of both what other jurisdictions do and what we have the ability to do.
Questions or comments from council? Seeing no questions or comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Batchelor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go ahead, Greg. I'll beat you to it. I'll be followed by Laura.
Okay.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. Laura Perry, Deputy City Manager. We'll be talking to you tonight about the Employee Retention Engagement Recruitment Plan and its impact on the 2023 budget, other departmental pockets of need, and capital investments. So as Jim mentioned at the start of the presentation, the city is still experiencing challenges in turnover, retention, and the attraction of employees. And as we've shared, this is a situation that is occurring statewide and across the nation, all sectors of employment. And with that in mind, we undertook a employee engagement and culture survey earlier this year, which informed the development of a multi-year strategic plan to address this issue that balances both one-time, short-term, and ongoing strategies, which include culture and engagement, business processes, and monetary items. The monetary items include an ongoing compensation plan, which consists of additional pay increases, improved in bargaining unit contracts for both fire and police, and monies for additional compensation market adjustments, which is an annual process the HR department undertakes to evaluate compensation and classifications throughout the city. In addition to the ongoing compensation items, we've also been utilizing one-term monetary strategies to address the current challenges in the market and with our own employees. That includes an inflation stipend, which we paid to employees through the September 16th pay period, and a 5% increase beginning in October 2022 based on performance evaluations that were recently completed for employees. And then lastly, we've also been utilizing strategic compensation strategies throughout the city to enhance retention and recruitment of our employees. Those include referral bonuses, signing bonuses, as well as a performance bonus program to ensure we're keeping our outstanding performers, as well as rewarding our frontline workers. Next slide. So moving on to other departmental pockets of need, starting with the Public Works Department, which is found in your budget book on page F175. As part of the cuts that were made during the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, Public Works eliminated several key positions. And in the 2023 budget, we are proposing to restore 3 of those positions: a facility project manager, which will increase service levels by addressing ongoing facility project needs, which includes a backlog of about 30 to 40 projects in the city. A new transportation project engineer to address workload related to capacity and roadway projects and other transportation capital project needs across the city. And the last position is a sustainability engineer, which was recommended an internal audit completed in 2019. And this position will oversee and manage energy usage in the city, develop an energy management plan, review energy charges, and make sustainability recommendations for construction and maintenance projects. Moving on to fleet, we are proposing to add one fire fleet technician to increase staff trained specifically to maintain and repair specialized emergency response vehicles and equipment to minimize downtime for the fire department, and convert one position to a permanent position, which oversees a lot of the administrative duties for fleet management, which includes billing, fuel orders, etc. And then lastly, in Park Aurora, we are increasing professional services to add 2 new contracted parking enforcement officers in the Parking Mobility Fund. The hiring of these 2 additional officers will allow for more consistent enforcement, coverage on Saturdays, faster response times to citizen cases, and allow for smaller patrol areas for all officers, thereby increasing the areas of the city being enforced. And these positions will be offset by revenues generated by their duties. Moving on to the HR department, human resources found on page F92 of the budget book. We are adding 3 FTE for the department, 2 of which are conversions of existing variable hour positions into full-time positions, a compensation analyst, which will be dedicated to addressing a high workload on classification and compensation needs, and a talent acquisition specialist who will be responsible for 30 to 40 active and concurrent recruitments going on at any time during the city. The last ad we'll be making for HR is a new employee relations specialist who will be responsible for managing enhanced performance management program for the city. Human Resources has been working through the implementation of Workday, which will include increased functionality around performance management in the city and reviews annually, and this position will be a key position as part of that effort. Next, the Library and Cultural Services Department found on F113 in your budget book. We are adding $50,000 in library programming and marketing funds to improve programming supplies, equipment, and marketing, which is vital to the library's ability to interact and serve the community. In 2023, a couple of teasers. The Aurora Public Library will be kicking off their Reimagine 2023 campaign, which will include going fine-free, a grand reopening for the new Chambers Library, and a limited edition library card, among other programs. More information to come on that. Next, and last but not least, the Parks and Recreation and Open Space Department found on F130 in your budget book. We are adding 1 FTE senior planner in the Parks Development Fund to support development review workload for parks-related plan review. This was a position that was eliminated that we are adding back. And then last, we are reducing 2 vacant positions in the Recreation Fund due to the discontinuation of the Morning Star program and associated revenues determined by Council earlier this year. The 2 positions were funded by Veterans Administration and Medicaid reimbursement revenues, respectively, which the city is no longer receiving as a result of the program not continuing. Next slide. Now focusing on transportation. Transportation continues to be a heavily focused investment area for the city. You have heard a lot about our new roadway maintenance plan that we are continuing to progress forward. Concrete work will be commencing next month, along with paving in 2023. As Greg mentioned, the budget includes the creation of a new transportation maintenance fund. We'll come back to that in our next slide. And wanted to touch on a few of the multimodal investments that you'll find in the budget. So we have funds in the budget to support the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Project in partnership with the City and County of Denver, CDOT, and RTD. And we are moving forward an IGA to City Council with the City and County of Denver that you will all see soon in relation to this project. In addition to that, we are continuing to pursue Dr. Cog TIP funding. There's 4 cycles this year, and are working through those various processes. We'll show you a slide here in a second on our hope around our project candidates and what dollars we could leverage through that process. And then we also have the infrastructure bill that we're continuing to evaluate our project candidates for, and hope to be very proactive and active in pursuing federal, state, and local grant opportunities around that. Other projects we have planned, so continuing implementation of missing sidewalks across the city, intersection improvements at Havana, at 11th and Delmar, and Parky Quincy and Smoky Hill, trail connections at 30th and Sable, implementing our Safer Main Streets grant that we received for various improvements along Colfax, continued implementation of bike lanes, and various planning efforts for the 13th Avenue multimodal improvements and Smith Road multimodal improvements, just to name a couple. Next slide. So as I mentioned, grants allow the city to leverage existing limited funding to address our major capital needs. And our goal is to strategically pursue capital grants and take advantage of all the federal, state, and local opportunities. And we'll be bringing forward those candidates to council over the next several months into next year. The city currently has several projects that are moving through the Dr. Cog TIP grant process, and this slide really demonstrates the power of the matching dollar. In this case, it's our ability to secure almost 7 times as much funding to address key transportation needs. So think of that $3.2 million as our down payment. As I mentioned, these are pending grants, but again, shows the power and how far these grant opportunities could take the city in addressing our capital needs. Getting into a bit more detail on our capital plan. So for Public Works, we have $168 million in our capital projects fund for the next 5 years. The majority of that funding is for transportation improvements, which include traffic signal construction, bridge maintenance, implementation of multimodal connections, and priority transportation projects. We also have $17.8 million for building maintenance and repair, so various capital improvements across the city to our city facilities. And one thing we wanted to mention is that for 2022, we have programmed an additional $2.5 million for traffic calming improvements throughout the city. And these dollars will address mitigations at 18 additional locations. And that helps us simply get farther down the list. We've received 106 requests to date, and of those, we've funded 63. In the budget book, you will see a net decrease of $158 million in the capital projects fund. The reason why you see this decrease is for the creation of the transportation fund. So the movement of funds from the capital projects fund into the transportation maintenance fund shows up as a decrease in the capital projects fund. But as in the new fund, it just shows simply the movement and placement of those dollars. And those dollars total $194 million for the transportation maintenance fund. And of that, we have $63.9 million programmed for the paving of streets, of which $35 million is from the certificate of participation that council approved earlier this year to address the paving of prioritized neighborhood streets across the city. Parks, Recreation, Open Space Capital Program. We have several new projects programmed in 2023. These include the completion of a strategic plan. This is a follow-up plan from the completion of the PROS master plan, which will be completed in Q1 of next year. We will be implementing a Westerly Creek Trail alignment at Stanley Marketplace, Xeriscape and Firewise improvements at fire stations across the city, a pond repair at Generals Park, the construction of the Highline Canal underpass at Colfax. This is a TIP grant match. It was on our slide mentioned earlier. And we have restored funding for median development or construction across the city that will result in an additional 1 mile of median construction based on today's current estimates and inflation around construction costs. Next, we wanted to touch on the ARPA funded projects. So the 2023 and 2024 budget includes funding to successfully complete the 4.5 million in ARPA funded projects in various parks listed here on the slide. Significant progress has been made in progressing these 12 parks, and these additional funds will help ensure that the project budgets are at an appropriate level to complete the estimated costs and supported scope. Currently, sites are being surveyed, and it is anticipated that a design services RFP will be released in the next couple of months. And then lastly, and importantly, we wanted to mention that the PROS capital budget does include additional funding for water conservation efforts across the city. These include turf conversions and irrigation system upgrades. In the capital budget, we have a total of 8.9 million programmed over the next 5 years, and Aurora Water and PROS will be bringing forward a plan to Water Policy Committee in the next month or so, reporting out exactly what the plan is utilizing these dollars. And last, ADA, as Jim mentioned, ADA is a high priority for the city to ensure we're in compliance with Department of Justice and varying laws around ADA. And we've programmed 1.3 million in funding in the PROS Capital Projects Fund over the next 5 years to address ADA improvements in various parks across the city.
This is your last slide before we go to Marshall. Do you want to?
Yes, let's pause for questions and then I'll hand it to Marshall to cover water, if that works.
Questions for Laura? Or comments? Just one on General's Park pond repair. I'm looking right at that $341,000. And I know on new development we're not allowing ornamental water features. Can you tell me a little bit about this project? Or somebody can.
Brooke, do you want to cover that one? Thank you.
This is Brooke Bell, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. The pond is has an historic designation. And so it does require us to repair it. There is a significant leak in the pond. And so that is the project. The pond needs to be repaired. It's the liner. And so it'll need to be drained, dredged, and the liner replaced.
Okay, further questions, comments? Seeing none, Laura, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, Marshall.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. You've heard a little bit about, or a lot about, water rates and fees over the last day and a half. I'm going to provide a little bit of background into what is feeding into some of those rate increases in the form of needs and capital projects, and then take questions, and at the end have a couple of overview slides on the rates and fees that I'll touch on briefly. So next slide. In water, you saw the magnitude of our both operating and capital project budgets earlier. In the operations of the department, staffing represents about 33 to 35% of our operating budget costs. We do operate fairly lean, but we also need to add some positions to keep up with increased workload and the growth that we're experiencing, regulatory requirements that are hitting us that are a little bit new, and some additional responsibilities that we've taken on within the utility. So one of the positions we're proposing to add is another customer billing representative. We take about the same number of calls as the general fund in the customer billing area. These billing reps not only help the customers with their bill payment, but they also help manage the Aurora Water Cares program that we mentioned last night. And again, the workload there requires that we add another representative to that group. We're also adding a technology administrator. The technology administrator will work within the water department and coordinate with IT on the technology needs of the utility. Water is a little bit unique in that we use human machine interfaces and supervisory control and data acquisition systems to operate our treatment facilities, our distribution system, and collection system facilities. And so again, technology keeps advancing. We collect more and more data. We're required to collect more and more data. And this administrator will help, again, keep us up to par in those areas in coordination with IT. We're then proposing the addition of a project coordinator. I'll talk about a couple of, well, in fact, I'll jump to that now. A little bit further down, you see the conversion of 4 variable hour employees. So we've approached growth and development workload a little bit differently in the water utility, in that we hired temporary employees and utilized private contracts to manage peak workload associated with development as it came in. And then we've monitored and tracked that workload to try and determine how much of it is more of a permanent workload and how much of it might reduce in future years. So we need to convert 2 inspectors, 1 project manager, and 1 GIS specialist to help us keep up with the growth and development in the city. We will still be maintaining some temporary employees and contracts to help with the peak workload. And then as it ramps down, we hope to be able to maintain that level of service through the FTEs, but we're proposing the conversion of 4 and the addition of a project coordinator to help with, again, that growth and development. And the next slide will go over the number of capital projects we have going on. So these positions, the 4 conversions and the 1 project coordinator, help manage and maintain the city's projects and keep up with growth and development from the private sector. So it's a combination of both workloads. We're then proposing the addition of a water conservation manager. Right now, the way the organization is structured is responsibilities for both public communications and water conservation are all on 1 person's plate. That's Greg Baker. You've met Greg. Greg has already announced a retirement date, unfortunately. So we are tweaking the organization to separate those areas a little bit. Again, with the new water conservation ordinance, the water conservation MOU, we've got a little bit of additional workload that's critical for us, but we need to stay on top of that. So we'll have a dedicated water conservation group within the utility, and this proposing a manager for that area. We then have a 1 addition of a water resources project manager. We are, as you've probably noted with the items that have been coming to council for approval in the water rights acquisition world, we've really ramped up efforts there. Opportunities are out there right now. I've got some concerns that those opportunities may ramp down and be less available in 10 years. Plus, the acquisitions are becoming more complicated and more difficult. So we need to add another water resources project manager to additionally increase our acquisitions and make sure we take advantage of the opportunities that are out there right now. Right now, we have basically 2 people who are managing our acquisitions in the South Platte Basin, which is where almost all of those occur. And we really need the addition of another staff person to help with those. Then water has taken on responsibilities for Access Aurora, or the customer service hub. We need to right size that group to be able to provide customer service across the organization. It came with 3 FTEs, and we're proposing to add 3 more. We're also looking at adding a customer service system that IT's helping with to get in place to be able to really elevate customer service throughout the entirety of the organization. So the 3 additions there are actually general fund additions, not tied to the water utility or rates and fees. And then lastly, as far as new positions, we've also shifted the drainage review responsibilities from Public Works over into the water utility and need to right size that group. And so previously, 3 positions for that drainage review group were taken to the development review or through the development review committee process, and the budget is capturing the addition of those 3 FTEs. We do have also in the operating budget the addition of $3 million for getting rid of our lead service lines. These are actually not the city's lead service lines, but our residents' lead service lines. The new lead and copper rule came out. It's making everybody be a lot more aggressive, and we're going to have to go into private property and assist people in getting rid of those lines. We're planning to tweak our lead replacement program by providing financial assistance now, not just to low-income property owners, but also low-income tenants. So we have $3 million programmed over 5 years. So it's a quasi one-time add in that it's programmed over 5 years and then would go away. We also are pursuing grants, federal grants, and we're hoping to not have to use most of what we've got programmed. So the plan is in future budget years to come back and reduce some of what we've put in the budget in this area, commensurate upon the grants that we're able to receive. So we're in the process of pursuing those right now. And then Dan Brotzman mentioned earlier that we're adding a paralegal as John Dingus has retired. His firm has historically taken care of basically all of our records management for us, and it's really just best industry practice for us to keep track of all our records on our own. And so we're proposing to bring those services in-house and need to add a paralegal to do that. Next slide. This is not the entirety of our capital program in the water and wastewater funds, but these are the significant highlights or the larger highlights. Our Rampart delivery system, that those of you who went on the water tour with us a few weeks ago were able to see kind of the beginning of that delivery system is over 50 years old. Those pipes are now over 50 years old, and some of the pipes are constructed of materials that only last 50 years. So we need to rehabilitate, replace, and upsize that system. We have $104 million programmed over 5 years to do that. And that's not the end of the cost there. There will be additional money needed in that area outside of the 5 years as well. Wild Horse Reservoir, we've talked about that a few times. It's not only a reservoir that is still proposed to be sized at about 90,000 acre feet, but it is conveyance pipelines between the Otero pipeline and the reservoir, the Wild Horse Reservoir and the Spinney Mountain Reservoir that interconnect Wild Horse to our system. We've got $262 million additional dollars programmed there over the 5 years. And that's likely not the entirety of that cost either. That will probably also roll some additional costs or we'll have needs outside of the 5 years associated with that project. Water rights acquisitions, I've talked about a couple of times. We've got $150 million programmed there over the 5 years. And then our 2 oldest water purification facilities, which we have 3, we have Wemlinger, Griswold, and Binney. Binney's a relatively new facility, but it's expandable. Wemlinger and Griswold are also both aging facilities that have been around for decades and have asset management needs. We need to update the facilities to be current with the newer water quality regulations and code that have come along. And so we have 62 million programmed at Wemlinger, of which 55 is associated with the chemical feed system. We have 81.5 million programmed at Griswold, which is focused on both the chemical feed system and the solids handling system. So, and then I mentioned Binney. Binney extends to the North Campus. Our Prairie Water System, anyway, extends to the North Campus. It's expandable, and we have phased expansions so we can capture the additional return flows that come to us from our wastewater that we recapture and reuse, in addition to being able to capture some of those South Platte water rights that we're acquiring. So we've got about $58 million programmed up at the North Campus. And that will expand our well capacity, our riverbank filtration wells that bring water out of the river, and then the conveyance to get the water down to the Binney Water Purification Facility. A couple of general categories then within our water capital fund. We've got about 37 million programmed for new transmission and distribution water mains. Those are exclusively to address the growth areas where we're seeing new growth and development. And then we do have 30 million programmed for asset management or raw water rehab. Again, we've got to keep our assets current and functional so that we don't have some of the problems that other entities have had without or when they haven't kept up with their asset management. So that's an overview of our water capital program. It's a very large program. Again, approaching $1 billion if you look out over the 5 years. So wastewater, a little smaller capital program there. Again, our wastewater treatment needs are met by Metro. So we do, with our rate increases on the wastewater side, those rate increases include the capital program for Metro on wastewater treatment. So we're primarily responsible for the collection and conveyance of that recovered water to Metro. So we've got a First Creek Interceptor, 26 million roughly programmed there. Sewer line construction, those are the smaller lines. Interceptors are the really large sewer lines. Then the smaller ones we just call sewer line construction. We've got 30 million roughly programmed there. Westerly Creek, we have our stormwater program embedded in our wastewater fund. Westerly Creek is a stormwater project where we're also having to deal with expanding our system into the new areas of growth and upgrading the system in existing areas of our stormwater sheds. Regulatory requirements have changed significantly in the stormwater world, so we're always having to try to keep up with those regulatory changes. With that, the next two slides, next slide, Greg. These you've already seen the details, so I'm not really going to get into these, but summary of the sewer and water rates and fees and sewer rates and fees that we've talked about already. And then next slide is the graph that shows how we compare and what this is doing. And again, I would be shocked if we don't actually get passed by one or two of the utilities that are currently below us as they're looking at slightly larger rate increases than we are. So with that, I will pause and take any questions.
Let me start with the first question, and that is, what do we know about PFAS right now in terms of what our response needs to be?
Yeah, so good question. PFAS, one of the new regulatory gifts that we've been given is PFAS. PFAS is showing up in pretty much all water supplies everywhere that are being sampled. It's rare to find water sources without PFAS in the parts per quadrillion range, which is where we can now test and where the federal government has set health-based guidance levels. Now, health-based guidance levels are not regulatory requirements, but they have the federal health-based guidance levels have resulted in states taking action and setting regulatory requirements. Colorado's not quite there yet, but they're kind of headed there. For us, we are fortunate in that the Binney Water Purification Facility was designed and built in anticipation of what were called at the time emerging contaminants. So PFAS is in the category of emerging contaminants. We built advanced treatment capabilities at Binney that are able to remove or destroy pretty much all the emerging contaminants that are out there. So PFAS specifically has two proven technologies that are able to deal with PFAS or remove it from water. One is ion exchange, the other is granular activated carbon, and the Binney Water Purification Facility has granular activated carbon as part of its treatment process. So we are able to remove PFAS from the water at Binney. Most of the PFAS we see in our water supply come from the South Platte, lower South Platte supply, which is the Binney source of supply. So we're able to remove the PFAS down to really, really low levels from the Binney water. We are, again, seeing very trace levels of PFAS show up in other water supplies. So we are collecting data right now, trying to figure out where the PFAS is, at what levels, and then we're looking at the capabilities at Griswold and Wemlinger. We're looking at the processes and what enhancements might be needed there. We're not sure we need any yet, but we are going down the path. In fact, you will see coming soon to council a request for piloting an enhanced granular activated carbon technology. We also have a pilot facility at Binney, and we're able to pilot or test emerging technologies to treat. And so Aurora is very well positioned, probably as well or better than any other water utility that I'm aware of in this space. But PFAS will be a challenge, and it will drive some additional treatment costs in our system.
Good. Questions of Marshall Brown?
Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Marshall, for this presentation. On that same note, well, I have two questions for you. Number one, where can I find a $230,000 home in Aurora?
Yeah, we should update that on the slide. Very good point, because I don't know that those exist. So, yeah, thank you.
Pretty sure they don't. But on a serious note, the mayor was talking about, forever chemicals and PFAS. We talked briefly at the water workshop about microplastics and that they're being found in pure snow up in the mountains. And what is our strategy to get ahead of that in our water supply?
Yeah, so we right now have two strategies that we're using as far as microplastics. So we do have, I'll talk about our source water or our watershed protection program. So we're active in watershed protection programs where we're trying to minimize how much or how many contaminants and the quantity of the contaminants that come into the watersheds. Now, to your point, in spite of those activities, contaminants are still entering the watersheds. And so the next strategy we've got is at our treatment facilities or through our treatment processes. So Binney is probably the best example because it's the newer facility that was designed specifically to treat or deal with compromised water sources. So it uses a multi-barrier approach, starting with the riverbank filtration wells that use soil aquifer treatment. And soil aquifer treatment, as far as we can tell to date, is very effective in dealing with the microplastics. So we do not appear to be having those get beyond our soil aquifer treatment portion, but then it goes to Binney. They're not broken down by the advanced oxidation we have, but we do have, again, enhanced filters there that give us some additional capabilities to deal with those. At Wemlinger and Griswold, that deal with less compromised water sources, We have conventional treatment, which includes multi-layered bed filtration that also gives us some capabilities to deal with those there. Microplastics, PFAS, all these emerging contaminants, the more we learn, again, they are going to drive additional enhancements in our treatment processes and will result in some additional costs. So we pilot, we test, we monitor, and we install protections in treatment, and we're active in the watersheds.
All right, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much, Marshall.
Thank you.
All right, last but not least, Roberto.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I have the last few slides here. I'll be speaking on homelessness, some other departmental pockets of needs, and some capital highlights before we move on to questions. Many of you have seen this slide before. This is a general overview of kind of current state on some of the homelessness expenses that are driving and impacting our budget. In particular, as you know, we have about $250,000 in our budget for Keeson, which is the third-party contractor to help with camp abatements. Year to date, we have about $103,000 spent on that, so we're in fairly good shape as of September, end of August. These are updated from our last time we spoke during our one-on-ones. Of that amount, $37,000 was for abatements along CDOT properties, which we're seeing quite a few since those are in right-of-ways along 225 and other CDOT property. We had 25 abatements in August alone, so you can kind of get a sense of the pace. And we have in the budget $75,000 for an additional FTE to assist with posting and attending to abatements. And that recruitment will start this fall. We have already purchased a city vehicle to help with that position, and will soon be 2 positions to be able to do that posting, since currently they were working with their own personal vehicle. So we wanted to make sure they had a city vehicle to do that city business in terms of abatement. In outreach, we've spoken a little bit about how we want to really be effective in that area, and we've had some challenges, as everybody else, Aurora Mental Health and Mile High Behavioral Health. Very difficult to recruit these positions, very difficult to keep them, and to have them trained to do the kind of outreach we are looking for. So we have a budget for that, and additional budget for that in 2023. We are still considering how we will work with that, whether that'll continue to be with our providers or whether we will bring that in-house. Obviously, a decision that we'll bring with council and update in terms of what will be the most effective way to do that, since, as we learned in Houston and we've learned in other models, the outreach is key in bringing in the unhoused into services and amenable to other options, whether those be shelters, housing, any other kind of case management services. So looking to make sure that we have adequate funding to do that. Shelter, this is things that you've already approved and through the council process, but are driving budget on the homelessness response. The pallet shelters, the safe outdoor spaces, we're expanding both at the Salvation Army and the Restoration Christian Ministries sites. 30 additional pallet shelters to provide temporary housing, which would help with our abatements, moving folks who are in abatements into some kind of shelter space, and those would be expanded. Cost, obviously, for the upfront for the cost of the pallets, along with the construction and installation, as well as the ongoing operation. Salvation Army will continue the operation for both sites and just expand those sites. Those are now operational as of August. Next slide. So, current housing landscape, as I referenced before, we do have additional shelter space through the safe outdoor space, the 30 additional beds. We also, as everyone knows, at the Fitzsimmons campus, we have the Comidas and Aurora Day Resource Center, 63 family beds and 86 single beds at Comidas. And then obviously the Day Resource Center is obviously only for day use, but it does have cold weather activation with 100 mats when that weather reaches a certain temperature. Gateway Domestic Violence has space. The Aurora Mental Health Center has the Path, which is current detox, ready to work, and Aurora has 50 beds. And then in the permanent supportive housing area, we have the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless has the Renaissance Veterans Apartments with 60 units. Providence of the Heights, just down the road, has 50 units. And so that's currently just a snapshot of what we have. There's other folks that will probably have some inventory coming online and in the queue, as many of you've seen with the Community Investment Act items that that you moved forward from study session last night. We are continually moving projects forward with additional space in various housing categories, various products. Next slide. For the future landscape, obviously, we in the 2023 will be looking at budget for the replacement of the facility on the Fitzsimmons campus, since the council made the decision at the spring workshop to move off of the campus. So we are obviously in discussions for a new site and trying to figure out the combinations and why we are going to Houston and San Antonio, and looking at and others have gone to Colorado Springs, looking at different models of how we would repurpose that combination of services that are currently offered on the Fitzsimmons campus. Ridgeview Rehabilitation is a state facility. That'd be transitional housing. That'll be converted to 250 beds and rehabbed this year, and hopefully operational sometime in mid-2023, maybe late mid-2023. Mile Behavioral Health Care has their Montview Emergency Family Shelter, 10 to 15 families for cold weather only. Aurora Mental Health Safety Net Campus on Potomac. That'll be a detox emergency shelter along with permanent supportive housing that the Aurora Housing Authority will be providing. That's the 60 beds at the last bullet there. That'll all be on that campus. So that'll be coming along online in the next 12 to 36 months. Next slide. So other departmental pockets of need in communications. In 2021, the legislature passed a bill that would require IT departments and local governments to make their all their IT facing like websites, kiosks, accessible to folks with disabilities. So that's a heavy lift. So if you can imagine all your internal, external facing modes of communication, to make that accessible for folks with disability, whether they be hearing impaired or sight impaired, there's a whole bunch of work that needs to go in from an IT technical perspective to get our systems in place to be able to do that. And we do not have currently anybody who is working on that. And so we have proposing a position to do that. We are required by the middle, I think, of 2024 to be in compliance. And if we're not in compliance, there's quite a bit of some significant penalties for not being in compliance. And so we are beginning that process in earnest to try to get our systems disability and accessibility for the disabled. In finance, as many of you know, we have the Workday transition as we are starting to work through payroll integration and financial reporting integration into Workday. We have been working with the current system, as many of you know, for years, decades, and that integration is very complex, and moving our current payroll system and how it's operated into Workday environment has proven to be significantly more challenging. So we're adding some more resources to be able to stand that up. And then in housing and community services, we are offering a City Hall to Go. That is essentially an effort to try to provide some, now that post-COVID, post-pandemic, we have a lot more mobile and hybrid technology capability, and we want to be able to deploy that in creative ways to meet our community and our residents where they're at. So typically we've had town hall meetings that we organize, or for example, when council members have their ward town hall meetings, which are wonderful ways to solicit and have community input and residential input. But we'd like to be able to have the technology to meet them where they're at, whether they're in their church, at parks, in libraries, in informal settings, and the technology to be able to do that and capture data and capture needs can be used across the city. So if Parks is looking for more information for their master plan or a particular planning process in the planning department, if they're looking for more community feedback beyond just the traditional community meetings, this technology will allow us to be able to do that, be able to provide council with more robust public input and public engagement to better inform our policy decisions. So that's in housing and community services. Next slide. I'm putting this slide up, and we asked Greg to put this slide up mostly for you to have a snapshot of where we're at. This is a very popular slide because it funds several programs that have been stood up in recent years. The youth violence prevention, obviously the homelessness funds, kind of marijuana tax revenue fund. So I wanted to have the council have a snapshot of where we're at, the money that is there. We certainly can provide more detail on any programs and go into depth. If you do have questions, we can follow up. I just want to make one note on this tax revenue. I think, and Greg can correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the first year where we've actually, marijuana tax revenue has flattened. Since we had created the recreational marijuana program and licensed those businesses, we've always been trending upwards in tax revenue collected. This year, I think, was the first year that we have actually seen a flattening of that revenue. So just a note of caution, as this has always been something that we've used for various projects. We've actually used it to bond for rec centers, et cetera. I don't know if we've hit peak marijuana usage in the city of Aurora, but we may just see flattening, and that might just be post-pandemic, but just want to be aware of that revenue trend in this fund. Next slide. Budget calendar. So we have our presentation tonight. We have our fall budget workshop on October 8th, and obviously we'll make any changes there based on the council's questions and decisions. We'll work through that process as we've done in the past. That'll be an all-day workshop on Saturday. And then the 24th, we'll do the introduction for first reading and final adoption on November 7th.
Okay.
And what are questions?
Let me ask the first one, and that is that you reported the cost of cleaning up or abating encampments along the CDOT corridor. I signed an IGA with the governor to get reimbursed for those costs. Have we been reimbursed?
I believe we have been reimbursed, and it's the process is on as we go, so we can get you current numbers about how much we have been going. I don't know what the rate is, but it takes a little bit of while to get that through the CDOT process, but we will give you the reimbursement rate and where we're at.
Thank you. Further questions?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for the presentation, Roberto. I'm just curious, how flexible are we with the expenditures around homelessness? I'm just curious because my hope is that after our upcoming visits and then maybe some discussions that we might be hopefully unified and moving in a different direction, and trying to also get regional partners on there. So is that something that y'all have maybe taken into account as you were putting this together, or is it just something that we're able to tweak in the future in terms of how we're directing those resources?
Sure. If I'm understanding your question correctly, the marijuana fund just by definition allows for flexibility. So that's number one.
Right.
And number two, the way that it is structured currently is just based on the policy decisions and staff decisions we've made up to September 20th, 2022. Any decisions and changes in the way that we approach our response, funding categories, strategies, that there's certainly flexibility in doing that. We do have some commitments with current service providers and other areas that obviously have, that are longer that we'd have to adjust necessarily, but really it is the council's policy decisions and in terms of how we want to allocate these funds. That spreadsheet that you saw with all the different funds, those are just the way the decisions have been made and by staff and previous council members and councils based on the need. As we start to see different needs, and clearly we have based on the numbers that we're seeing and the increased kind of point in time in terms of homeless population, it calls for different strategies. So if the council decides to move money in different areas and different responses, whether that's transitional housing or permanent supportive housing or more shelter space or safe outdoor space, those are all policy decisions, and we can certainly adjust the budget accordingly.
All right, thank you.
Further questions, comments? I see none. Greg, I think we're done.
I think we are. There was a series of questions that came out of this, just like we did for the one-on-ones.
Councilmember Lawson, did you have something?
Mayor, I'm sorry, I have a question just for Roberto. Roberto, on the youth violence program, you said that it looks like there's 1.6 something in reserve. When I was looking at the bottom of the chart, is that minus the FTE or the vacancy savings? That's not included with the vacancy savings because there's positions that have not been filled and they have been lost. Is that correct? How I'm interpreting that?
Yes and no. We probably can get you a slide that cuts and aggregates all the youth, breaks that out entirely. That's a total amount, but we can basically do the vacancy savings to date because some of those positions have been vacant, how much we've spent in personnel. We have that slide for you. So we can give you a fuller briefing of what money has been spent in 2022, what money is vacancy, and what money is available for 2023 moving forward if we keep the current structure that council has provided. So let us get you all those numbers in greater detail, because that one is more of an aggregate. It doesn't break out exactly how the costs and expenses that we have in there and the vacancy savings.
Is that possible to have possibly before, or have me review before the budget workshop? Okay.
Yeah, we have that. We can get that to you this week, or when we provide all the other questions.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none, I want to thank everybody, thank staff, and thank all the members for participating. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.
All right, night, y'all.
Good night.